So, looks like my Yokai Watch video did really well, huh? Welp, you know what that means. It's time to take advantage of this opportunity and milk this franchise for views, baby, by talking about its sequel. After, like, a year. Will people even care? Whatever. That's right. Today I will be talking about the sequel for Yokai Watch, Yokai Watch 2. With this being the sequel video, I'm of course not going to be going in depth about the series again, but if you do want to know more about it, then I recommend watching the first video, as I talk about the development of the game there. Now for the sequel itself, unlike the original game, for this one, they decided to go with the Pokemon route by initially releasing it with two separate versions, with those two versions being Bony Spirits and Fleshy Souls. Then of course releasing a completed third version a year later called Psychic Specters, that has all the content from the original two versions while also adding some new content to the game. All of which I'll be mentioning in the video later. Now, although this is a sequel and it might not seem like there'd be a whole lot to talk about for the development side of this game, there are still a few things I'd like to talk about regarding the pre-launch of the game. It won't be long, but sit back and relax as we get into Yokai Watch 2. After the surprising success that was Yokai Watch, Level 5 of course knew that they struck it big, and with that, knew they had to capitalize on it by not only releasing more merchandise, but also with a sequel for the game. Though according to Akihiro Hino, who if you don't remember, is the CEO of Level 5, the major success wasn't what prompted them to make a sequel, as they've already had thought about making one. And not only that, but they've also planned to split it into two different versions from the beginning. He goes into more detail as to why, explaining, children like having things that other people don't have, so from a marketing perspective, having two versions is a good idea. Where people would have some hesitation about getting two copies of the same game, if you have different versions, it's a lot easier for them to buy both. Which, yeah, sort of checks out. And there are also those who will buy both versions to have a complete set. Like me. Because I like getting swindled, I guess. I personally find this explanation to be interesting, as it's slightly different from why Pokemon originally went with the dual release. For those who don't know, the reason for the dual release was, well, for one thing, it was of course for the social aspect, but it was thought up because of the main core aspects for the games, trading and collecting. Which was thought up because the creator of Pokemon, Satoshi Tajiri, was jealous of game designer and illustrator for Pokemon, Ken Sugimori, for getting two of the same rare weapons in Dragon Quest II. Wanting for there to be a way for Sugimori to trade that weapon to him, that's how they thought up the trading aspect for Pokemon. Then of course they made the two versions for that social aspect, but also for marketing purposes, I'm sure. I know that since they were the pioneers of the dual release idea, they didn't have any data or research of it do well, but even then, I find it to be interesting how slightly different the reasonings are for both series' dual release method. But later in April 2014, in that month's issue of Korokoro, Yokai Watch 2 Ganso and Honke, those are the Japanese names, was announced to be released that same year in July. Jumping ahead to its release in Japan, both versions of Yokai Watch 2 received positive reviews from Famitsu with a 36 out of 40. If you don't know how Famitsu gives their ratings, they have 4 reviewers play the game, and then they each give their scores to then add them all up for an overall score. Usually you take their reviews with a grain of salt. Also with the release of both versions, they released the limited edition 3DS XL. I know I said that in the last video, but this is sort of a correction as the 3DS was actually released for this game, not the previous game, or I should say first game. But point still stands, I wish I could have had this. Now what's the most important thing to note here are the sales for the game. If you remember from the first video, check it out if you haven't, the first game nearly sold 1 million copies in Japan, but the sequel was able to outdo that 2 times. As sales for both copies combined sold a bit over 2 million, with just counting physical copies. Level 5 was able to successfully ride the wave they had going between the release of the first and second game, and with that, they were able to cement themselves in the Japanese market. As a bit after the release of this game was what helped make Yokai Watch the biggest thing in Japan, all the while creating a bit of buzz outside of Japan, claiming it to become the Pokemon killer. And we of course know where that led. Later that same year in December, Level 5 released the third version of the game, Yokai Watch 2, Shin Uchi. This further helped the overall sales for Yokai Watch 2, raising it up to nearly 2.5 million sales, and again, this is only counting physical copies. With the success that the franchise was receiving, it was clear to Hino that it was time to expand the franchise outside of Japan. This was definitely the peak for the franchise, in Japan at least. Now as for how it went for the West, I kinda talked about that in my other Yokai Watch video, so there's no need for me to mention that here. Moving on to the release of Yokai Watch 2 in the West, it was announced that the name for both versions will be Bony Spirits and Fleshy Souls, as well as announcing that the game would be released in September 2016 in North America, October 2016 in Australia, and April 2017 for Europe. Remember, these came out a year later after the release of the first game in the West. But looking at the dates, you can probably see something that will cause these games to drop further in popularity in the West, as something new was coming over the horizon that would ultimately kill the 3DS. But that's for later when I talk about the third game. Before I move on to talking about the game's reception in the West, there's one interview with Hino that I found that I wanted to mention as it kinda makes the whole situation sad. This interview is talking about what Hino hopes for the success of Yokai Watch 2 in the West. Now, the article first mentions about the not so favorable sales of the first game, which, if you remember, barely reached 400k sales. In response, Hino remains hopeful that the second game will do well as he brings up the jump in sales from the first game to the second in Japan. He also adds that he worked on making an ecosystem for the franchise by releasing merchandise and having an anime along with it, and that it helped the series overall as shown by the sales of the second game. So by having that same strategy in the West with having localized the anime and selling merchandise, they'd hope that those results will show in the release of Bony Spirits and Fleshy Souls. Now, I'm sure we can guess if he's right on that or not, but before I get to that, I do want to comment on that strategy being applied in the West. I will commend them that they tried to put a lot of effort to push the brand in the West, more so than you would see with other Japanese franchises. I mean, did they go ham with, as I mentioned, trying to sell toys and stuff. I mean, that's why I have both Yokai Watch models in the middle so they were able to officially release. Not only that, but they promoted their game for what seemed like everywhere, as they of course had booths at E3 with demos for the game, Rep E3. Then they had events at Comic-Con where there were exclusive merch that you could have gotten. Though even then, I feel like there were some issues with their strategy, like when they localized the anime, it was aired on Disney XD, where most of Disney's neglected shows go. Then there's their marketing, which I feel like it wasn't done well, to say the least. I mean, if you look at an old Yokai Watch commercial, then you'd think of one of two things. One being that it looks really cheaply made, or two being that the ads for the games were just really weird. But even with all that aside, there was one looming threat that Yokai Watch had to compete against for that same audience that it was trying to capture. We all pretty much know who that threat is. That, of course, is Dragon Quest monsters. I mean Digimon. I mean Robopon. I mean Fossil Fighters. I mean World of It's Pokemon. Pokemon has cemented itself within the Western market as the only monster collecting game, and any other that tries to, at least, live in that same ecosystem dies because Pokemon fans cannot play anything other than Pokemon. I mean Monster Hunter Stories. So Yokai Watch had some real competition, but they were lucky enough to have the first game be released in a year where there wasn't a mainline Pokemon game. As I said earlier, it sold barely 400k copies, so it's time to circle it all back to what Hino had hoped for with the second game. Did all the marketing and push they've done help the second game, and did it live up to the hopes to what Hino had? Well, according to sales data for the game, it sold a whopping... There's no info on the sales.
You gotta be shitting me!
And when a company doesn't reveal their sales data for a game, that usually means that it did not perform well. Now I have some estimated numbers from VG charts, which coming from there, you have to take it with a grain of salt. But I won't reveal it until I talk about the third version. But what happened in 2016 that made the game not sell well? Was it bad marketing? Was the game terrible? What could have happened to make Yokai Watch 2 not sell well?
it a revolutionary smartphone game or a potentially lethal fad?
The app has already soared to the top of the download charts and added $7 million in market value to Nintendo.
You tell me you were it beforehand.
That's funny.
Only once.
Oh. Yeah, whereas the first game didn't have Pokemon to compete with, which was one of the reasons why I picked up Yokai Watch, in 2016, the second game had a lot to compete with. Hey, I still bought both copies of the games, so I did my best to support the games. Pokemon that year reignited the fanbase and brought back old fans as well thanks to Pokemon Go. It's an understatement to say that it was a massive hit. I mean, it was everywhere on the news because of all the shenanigans that people did to capture Argentini and Charizard. I mean, it even spurred one of the biggest and cringiest memes that year with the elections that were happening in the US.
I don't know who created Pokemon Go, but I'm trying to figure out how we get them to have Pokemon go to the polls.
Ugh. So, to put it bluntly, Yokai Watch 2's failure was just a matter of being released at the wrong time and just having terrible luck.
Unlucky!
Sorry. Also, as a side note, critics were being very harsh on the game, with IGN and GameSpot both giving it a 5 out of 10, which is crazy. Some of the criticisms on the game I feel like are valid, but a 5 out of 10? These games were a decent improvement from the first game, which IGN gave a 7. The only reviewers that gave it a good score was Nintendo Life, which, personally, I feel like they were a bit generous with giving it a 8.5. I would personally give these games around a 7, as the games are fun and have some charm, but there were a few things I disliked, which I would get into way later in the video. Oh, and before I move on to the third version, there's one thing that they did with the release of both Fleshy Souls and Bony Spirits that I personally did not like, which was that they locked 2 yokais behind a digital purchase for the games. Those 2 being Sailor Neon for Fleshy Souls and Robotnion F for Bony Spirits. This meant that to fully collect every yokais for either game, you would have to buy 2 digital copies of the game, and if you're a physical collector like I am, then you would have had to buy 4 copies of the games. Oh, also, the physical copies of both versions came with exclusive yokai medals that each gave an alternate ultimate move for Jibanyan. So yeah, again, you would have had to buy all 4 copies of the games to feel like you've collected everything. Not even Pokemon would do that, and the only scummy thing they do is making you have to purchase 2 separate DLC packs for both versions of the games. But, to move things along, it's now time to talk about the release of the third version of Yokai Watch 2, Psychic Specters. So unlike in Japan, where it came out the same year as the originals, this game came out a year later after Bony Spirits and Fleshy Souls. This version, like the third versions of every other Pokemon game, was the definitive edition of Yokai Watch 2, combining all the aspects of both games, all the while adding more content for the game, making it the best version to play, and it's the game I'll be playing through for this video. But there's one thing that we need to know. Did this definitive version save Yokai Watch 2 by selling a ton of copies? Well, the answer to that is a whopping... There's no info on sales. Yup, which means it did not sell well. But now I can show you the estimated sales that is guessed from VG charts, with it being 0.22 million copies being sold. That is terrible compared to the first game, so Hino's hope did not pan out well. But what could have come out that made Yokai Watch 2 Psychic Specters not sell well? Well, it was the release of the Nintendo Switch. Again, really bad timing for Yokai Watch. Unlucky. By the time Psychic Specters came out, the 3DS was practically on life support, as the Switch was dominating the scene with it pumping out amazing games on its first year. No one cared about the 3DS at that point, except for me, and like 5 other people who were excited for the few games that were being released in its final months. Okay, I know I probably went on a bit too long in this section, but I feel like it's worth knowing the dichotomy between how the West viewed this game compared to how it was received in Japan. especially when it comes to knowing the future of the franchise here in the West. But that third game is for a different video, and I wasted all this time explaining the decline of its little popularity in the West when I could have made a whole separate video on it. God damn it. Anyways, to move things along and with all that context out of the way, I think it's time to actually delve into the game and talk about Yokai Watch 2 Psychic Specters for the Nintendo 3DS. Playing this version of Yokai Watch 2, I should probably start off here with some of the new stuff that was added for Psychic Specters, at least with what's here in the title menu, right below the new games option. First off, there's the import data from either Booty Spirits or Fleshy Souls, which just lets you carry over your save data from those games, in case you never finished the game, or just so you can have a jump start to the post-game content to do all the new stuff and get all the new yokais. Which is something I would say I would love for Pokemon to do, but they already let you carry over Pokemon between games with Pokemon Bank, and plus, they don't do a third version anymore. I should probably stop with the Pokemon comparisons, huh? The next button below that is Yokai Watch 2 Link, which if you have save data on your system for either versions of the game, or link the game with someone else's copy, then it unlocks a new Sacred Dungeon, which I'll get into when I get to the post-game content, so far later down the video. With those out of the way, it's now time to start a new game. Choose our character, name him Nate because I'm unoriginal, and begin our adventure.
Ah, the Yokai Watch. The loathsome device that connects humans and yokai. Has no place in our ideal world. Got it!
Before I get on with the daily life of a Japanese school kid, I'd like to mention another difference with this version of the game. In the starting cutscene, we get introduced to 3 of the villains of the game. However, one of them was added for this version. That new character is specifically the bronze one in the middle. I will mention now that the character doesn't make an appearance for the main story, which kinda makes them pointless to add, but we'll get into that later. Anyways, getting to the game itself, we wake up as Nate enjoying his summer vacation. However, from the starting cutscene, we realize that we don't have our Yokai Watch with us. Well, that isn't important for now as we go out on a little family outing, but the happiness doesn't last for long as we soon have to make the biggest decision of our life. This is more important than any presidential election, more important than which house to go with in Fire Emblem 3 Houses, and even more important than deciding which is the best waifu in Xenoblade Chronicles. The answer to that, by the way, is it's naturally Nia. No, the most important decision in our life is choosing which donut to get. Soul donuts or spirit donuts? That is the question. It's so much of a big decision that not only are Nate's parents having another divorce-worthy argument over it, but the whole block is. but the final decision is left all up to you. Now, if this was the original version of Yokai Watch 2, the decision would be dictated by which copy you bought. If you were playing Burning Spirits, then you only be able to get the Spirit Donuts. Or if you were playing Fleshy Souls, then you only get the Soul Donuts. But since this is the definitive version, we actually get to pick for ourselves, and picking whichever donut dictates the story path we go with. Kinda. The differences are very minuscule, and it just decides which story-related yokai we end up getting, while the other we would have to get through a post-game side quest. So essentially, you aren't really missing much from choosing one from the other. After making my decision by choosing the Spirit Donuts, we're told to go on home without them, as they have a talk with each other. Oof, you know what that means. It's time for Nate to relive his trauma from the last game of his parents nearly getting a divorce. I swear, Nate's dad should go to a cabaret club like every Japanese salaryman. Don't look that up if you're a kid. But as Nate is thinking about his trauma, he's then interrupted by his friends, and they show off their new watches as of their hypebeast channels. Then it's only till now that Nate starts feeling as if he's forgetting something. But again, that thought is quickly interrupted as he then goes to the park to catch some bugs with his friends. We get our bug net and meet up at the park, and this is where our tutorial starts. Okay, I've been waiting to say this, but for the next few chapters, it's all going to be like the first game where it's going to be a slice of life. Also, I want to mention from the last video, I called each chapter having an episodic format, but it's more fitting to say that they had a more slice of life feel to it. I don't know why I didn't think of that, so thank you to that one commenter that sort of corrected me on that. Anyways, back to the game. These several chapters that play out before the actual meat and potatoes of the story are just glorified tutorial missions, as they reintroduce the mechanics of the first game for the new players, while introducing new stuff for this game. I would skip the chapters, but I feel like I should still go over them for the sake of it. Especially for the new stuff that was added. For the tutorials, however, I will be skipping over them as I've already gone through them in the first game. Watch that video, by the way. Back to the story, we catch a few bugs and see who caught the best bug, with Bear being the winner. Eddie then gives us something new to the game's menu, with that being apps. So in the first game, the menu was pretty dull, with there being a few options to select from looking at your current party, going to the options, looking at the medallion, and etc. But in this game, they decided to make the menu look better, and let me tell ya, it definitely feels like it has more of a personality than the first game. As in this game, unlike the first, you're actually able to change the background of the menu, which is very nice. For the apps though, you'll get more of them throughout the game, and as easy as it would be to wait until I get most of them to explain what they do, I'll just explain them as we get them. So the Critter Collection app is the same as the Medallion, where it keeps track of all the fishes and bugs that you've caught, and that's pretty much it, so moving on. After golfing down some ice cream from the nearby Kombini, everyone goes their separate ways. But as Nate is heading home, he then gets alerted to a strange store conveniently called the Memory Store. Walking past all the knickknacks, including one that's similar to the Tower of the Sun statue that is, of course, shamelessly stolen from 20th Century Boys, shake my head, we talk to the old man at the counter. After doing so, our attention is then focused on this epic Subway Surfer footage. I mean, this mysterious watch that we've totally never seen before. The old man vaguely explains what it's able to do and sells it to us for $1. Greatest steal of my life. Putting it on, Nate gets more of a feeling that we've forgotten something, but unable to remember what that is, the shopkeep then tells us to instead use the $1 on the gacha machine that's outside. Man is really trying to get us hooked into gacha at an early age, huh? Next thing you know, Nate's gonna be playing Nikkei or something. Or even worse, Genshin. But upon doing so...
Huh? Is this it? Let's see. This is just a rock, isn't it? This is so lame.
Hey! Now wait a minute! Are you seriously going to throw away your hard-earned money like that?
talking rock.
Enough chit-chat. Open the capsule already. I'll explain later.
Okay.
Why, hello! My name is Whisper. I am a yokai. You set me free. I shall become your butler. Charmed.
Yokai?
That's right, we meet a familiar face upon opening the capsule. Whisper does his whole introductory spiel to us like in the first game, and even tries to teach us how to use the Yokai Watch. However, Nate seemingly already knows how to use it. Then after messing with it, all of Nate's and Whisper's memories from the first game come flooding back in, and we even get shown the stupid promotional art JPEG of Jibanyan. Well, at least it isn't as overused as the Mario Cast renders that Nintendo always uses on everything. I'm being serious with this. Every Mario render that Nintendo uses for like promotional art, they're the exact same renders. But with the both of them remembering everything now, they then begin to wonder what happened to Jibanyan, and so we go look for him at the same spot where we met him in the first game. We eventually find him near the fish shop and watch him do his thing.
Coming right now. Take this, you dumb truck! Cause of
So I'm just gonna come out here and point out that we've been hit with 3 cutscenes so far in this one chapter. I'm not complaining, but I do want to point out that this game is gonna have more cutscenes than the first one. Which kinda shows the quality for this sequel, with it kinda showing that they're sort of focusing on story a little. Anyways, back to the game. Jibanyan doesn't recognize us as well, and he goes over his backstory once again. But unlike the first game where there wasn't any voice acting, this time the line that Amy says is voiced.
I can't believe you let yourself get hit by a truck. You lame cat.
Though if I have to guess, they probably just got that voice clip from the anime. We praise Jibanyan on his efforts, and from that, his memories are restored, with the slideshow showing us the only 2 cutscenes that he was in the first game. Really shows how involved he was in the first game. We also befriend him again, making him our first party member in our team. With that resolved and still wondering why we lost our memories in the first place, we head back to the memory store to question the shopkeeper. Though once we do go back there, the shop is no longer there anymore, nor any trace of it. So we leave with no leads to our memory loss. Though as we're walking off, we encounter our first brand new yokai in this game, Bushido. Get it? He's a Bushido, but has a brush instead of a sword. This is meant to be a tutorial on how battles work, but again, I'm not going to explain that as I already have in the first video. But I will mention I remembered how to fast forward battles, and that's by pressing the X button. Thank you commenters for telling me that. So after that battle and acquiring a new yokai to our team, we go on home for the day. But unbeknownst to our group, the 2 yokai witches, or whatever, show up and discuss how their plan failed, and now they have to come up with something else. They then disappear, ending the chapter. Before we move on though, here's a little Japanese lesson for you guys at home. So the name of these witches, Kin and Gin, actually have meaning in Japanese. Kin, written in this kanji, means gold, and for Gin, with this kanji, means silver. You might have been able to guess that from the colors they're wearing, but hey, at least you can't say you didn't learn anything in this video. You're welcome. Does knowing these words have any plot significance at all? Not really, and though I don't know how useful knowing these words would be, at least you know them now, so again, you're welcome. Also, at the end of the chapter, we also get some new apps, with those being the Medallion map and the Yokai Meadows app. I'm sure you don't need a reminder as to what they do, as they're similar to the ones in the first game. So I'm just gonna move on to the next tutorial chapter now. The chapter starts with an epic and funny Whisper reaction shot as he remembers about needing to teach us about the Crankakai. This is also something that I've gone over in the last video, but I'll briefly go over it again, as well as mentioning some special coins you can get that I never mentioned in the first game. But before I go to Mount Wildwood to talk about that, there's something new that you can do in this game, and that's switch out your travel companion. If you remember from the first game, Whisper will follow alongside you in the overworld throughout the whole game, and you couldn't swap him out. However, in this game, you're now able to switch him out with another yokai, which is pretty cool. One tiny detail that they did for this that I kinda find funny are the buttons to switch out your companion. Of course, choosing the Whisper button is big and grandiose, while the other options are small as Whisper wouldn't want you to switch him out. But doing so, the image on the button changes to this image of Whisper in utter shock that you're choosing another yokai but him. Whisper cannot catch a break, man. Again, it's these little details that they add that makes this game kinda charming. Anyways, getting to the Crankakai, Whisper shows us how to use it as well as tells us we can get yokais out of it, and demonstrates it by giving us a coin to let us pick out a free yokai. The three that we're able to choose from are Ruffraff, who's a physical attacker, Manjumut, who I think is meant to be a tank, somehow, and finally Tattletale, who's kind of a support. It doesn't really matter who you choose here, as you can get them at any point throughout the game. I decided to pick Tattletale just because she's able to heal, and that's pretty nice to have early on. After picking her, Whisper tells us to head back home. However, there were a few things I want to mention about the Crankakai, specifically the coins, that I didn't talk about in the first video. Now normally in the game you can find different colored coins to use on the Crankakai, but those aren't the only coins that you can get. If you head to the post office at the very south of Springdale, talking to a specific teller, you can input passwords that will give you special coins. Not only that, but there are passwords you can put in that give you sellable items for money, XP boosters, fusion materials, equipable items for certain yokais, or even event items that give you access to rare yokais. Finding the passwords for these are of course easy, and it was as well back then, since all you needed to do was just search them up. But I really have to wonder how people were meant to find these passwords. I mean, if someone was trying to collect every yokai and then only having the event ones left, they'd be very confused as to how to get them without a guide or something. Though the passwords aren't the only thing that they would have to worry about, as next to the post office is the bank. And there you can talk to one of the tellers who will ask you if you want to scan a QR code. If you bought any of the Yokai Watch toys, specifically the medals, then you've probably wondered what the QR codes on the back does. Well, those QR codes can be used in the game to get free coins for the Crankakai. But you'd be wasting your time scanning those in. What's more important is scanning some specific QR codes that give you some special coins to get special yokais from the Crankakai. Again, this is another instance where you would have to do some research to even know this, but at the end of the day, it's completely worth it as these yokais are very good. I will say for the yokais where you need the specific items, you're gonna be waiting until the post game to get them. I just find it odd that the game doesn't explain the use of the post office and the bank to you, and it's all just something that you just have to figure out on your own. Especially getting all the passwords and stuff. Getting all of that was a nightmare when these first came out in the West. But again, by now it's all relatively easy to get as there are forums that list the passwords and QR codes. Okay, with all that explained and over with, let's get back to the story itself. After getting our free yokai, we leave the mountain, but as we are, Whisper is there to introduce us to another part of the game, the side quests. I would skip this, but completing this tutorial quest unlocks us a new app. Also, progressing the main story is locked until we complete this. But after giving this guy the cicada that he wants, we get our first reward, which is an option between two food items. The reward is laid out like this to further tie in the dual versions thing, though the reward or choice of it isn't what's important. Again, it's the app that Whisper gives us, which is the Trophies app. Now, as we all know, unlike PlayStation or Xbox, Nintendo doesn't have a trophy or achievement feature with their consoles, so the Trophy app is sort of to supplement that for this game. Basically, Yokai Watch 2 shamelessly stole PlayStation's trophy feature. Shake my head. As for the trophies themselves, some of them are pretty easily attainable from basic tasks such as playing the game for a certain amount of time, getting the collectibles like fishes, bugs, and yokais, completing a certain number of quests, winning a certain amount of battles, and etc. And those are the only handful of things that the game tells you about. The conditions for getting the other achievements are kept hidden from you, and you're left to find them for yourselves. Though some of those hidden ones are related to quests, so there's that. Plus, now that this game is 10 or 7 years old, whichever way you want to look at it, but it still hurts to know that it's that old, all the trophies and how to get them are easily searchable. Now moving on to the next tutorial quest, while it is another one where again I can skip over it, I just want to comment on the new yokai for this game, Nosers. Well, to be more specific, I want to talk about the design for one of them, that being the one with the nose hair. This is going to be more of a fun fact because in the game, that's how they're meant to look. However, their appearance in the anime for the US release has one notable difference. Instead of having a nose hair stick out of their nose, they instead have a booger hanging out. It's such a small change that they didn't need to do it, as the game kept the original look as is, yet for the anime they felt like they needed to make that change. Just a weird localization change that I just wanted to bring up just because I thought it was funny. Now for the last tutorial quest that we need to do, we get introduced to a new mechanic, the baffle boards. To use this quest as an example, this coal mini is having issues getting customers, so we decided to lend a hand. Going outside, our watch reacts to something, and checking what that something is, a baffle board appears before us. Inspecting it, we have to complete a little quiz for it, which is to guess what yokai the board is describing. We only get 3 hints as to what the yokai could be, and we have to type in the name of that yokai. These baffle boards will really test your yokai knowledge. For this one, we can pretty much guess that it's describing Hungramps, so typing that name in, we get it right. I would really hate to be the kid that got this as their first Yokai Watch game and not know who Hungramps is. But although we got the question right and the spawn on the baffle board is activated, we're missing the crucial piece to fully activating the baffle board, and that is the yokai itself. So taking Whisper's suggestion to check our kitchen, we go back home to see if a Hungramps is there, and sure enough, there is, and they're spiriting Nate's mother, Wood. After resolving his hunger issue, he becomes her friend and we get his yokai medal. We head back to the baffle board, summon him to stand there for eternity, and it makes people who come close to the Kombini want to come in and buy snacks there, thus exploiting this poor senior yokai for financial gain. Still not as bad as some family vlog channels though. Due to helping out this Kombini clerk, this specific store will now sell food items on a discount. So to sum up, the point of these baffle boards are to enhance a facility or to change the area. And these baffle boards are scattered across all of Springdale, so be sure to find them and try to unlock them because they will help you out. Though of course there is a part where you'll have to find those specific yokais to activate them, which will be a hassle as some of them are attainable kinda late in the game. But I'll try to mention some more of the baffle boards throughout the video to give a more further idea as to what they unlock. After completing all those tutorial quests, we head back home and call it for the day. But that's not the end of the chapter. The next day starts with a cutscene of some nobodies getting their food stolen by a crow, which sets up the conflict for what's about to happen. It's further set up when watching the news as they're warning people about those pesky crows. But somewhat ignoring that, we head off to meet with Eddie at the park. Meeting up with him, he doesn't take long to start flexing on us with his limited edition watch that he got because his dad had connections. Man, way to rub it in, huh? He does lend us one of his watches so that we could try it out, though as he's about to, a crow swoops in and snatches it away. Who could have seen that coming? But we don't have to worry as Eddie's other watch is able to track it down, so we start going after it to retrieve it back. Tracking it down at the bridge, not that bridge, Eddie swoops in to grab the crow, but due to startling it, the crow drops the watch in the river and flies off. However, instead of Eddie being worried about the watch, since it's waterproof, he's confused as to why it's floating. That's where we step in to find out that a yokai's behind it, only to find that it landed on a wall kappa as he's taking a nap down the river. So we go over to fetch it, however, as we are, a mischievous yokai is down there scheming. I will say it is a bit of a drag having to watch and follow wall kappa as he's slowly drifting down the river. You know, just a minor complaint due to my zoomer brain. But once wall kappa does flow his way to land, Nate and Eddie are glad to have the watch back. However, due to their negligence by not picking it up sooner, the yokai from earlier snatches it. This is a new yokai named Yoink, and I'm pretty sure you can guess what it does from its name, as well as from the actions it's committing. Which leads to the next thing as it starts running away with the watch, meaning we now have a chase sequence. Yippee! Well, while I have the whole sequence happening in the background, let me take this time to tell you an additional thing about the trophy app that kinda gets open at this point. Or possibly earlier when you get the app. I don't know. I decided to check it out at this point during the chase. Now while it's cool to look at the PNGs of the trophies I've collected, it's sort of like your waifus. Wouldn't it be cool if you were actually able to see them, like their 3D models? Well, you can, as if you go in the middle of the pond at the park, there'll be this, I don't know, let's just call it the backrooms entrance, cause why not? And standing next to it is this weirdo named Mr. E. You'll be seeing him a lot when it comes to the extra contents of the game. But talking to him gives you access to enter the bunker, and inside of it is a room where all the trophies you've collected will be placed and displayed there. You don't get to interact with the trophies themselves, but you are able to look at them in all of their 480p 3D glory. And wow, that's just beautiful, man. There's also a random throne in the middle of the room for you to look like a badass for having all these trophies. Though for right now, it makes me look like the owner of an Xbox Series X or a PS5. A man with no games. With that over with, time to get back to the chase, to which hopefully it's at the part where we get introduced to a new mechanic, which feels like the reason they made this whole chase sequence. The new mechanic that Yokai Watch 2 added is being able to walk along these brick fences. Yeah, it might not be the coolest new thing, but it's a nice addition that somewhat opens up new areas to explore to get hidden treasures and allows for shortcuts in some cases. Okay, I think it's now time to actually get to the end of the chase. We end up cornering Yoink, but they still don't give up and begin fighting us. Defeating them, Whisper retrieves the watch back, though Jibanyo starts wanting to mess with it, which results with it falling down the manhole. We go down the sewer, where we begin sweating until we find the yokai causing it, as well as them having the watch. So the same thing happens where they refuse to give it back and we fight them for it. Man, beating people up really does solve everything in life, huh? Other than all that though, there's just one comment that Nate makes about the condition of the watch that I just don't know why they made him say this. Swelton really is the gooner of our generation. We give the watch back to Eddie, blissfully unaware of the gooning that it took, as he's distracted by all the weird shenanigans that the watch was doing. And the chapter ends with Whisper being attacked by a bunch of crows. That really was the chapter of all time. Sorry, but am I sounding a bit too pessimistic? I mean, that feeling is probably not going to be ending soon, as these opening chapters can really put you off since they're mainly trying to reintroduce the mechanics of the game. Which is fine, but having played the first game, these chapters can feel a bit of a drag. Though the slice of life feel of what's going on is making the whole thing bearable until we get to the main conflict. But alright, enough of me yapping, let's move on. The chapter starts with Nate desperately searching for something, and upon being asked what he's looking for, it's revealed to be his summer homework. Not finding it in his room, he assumes it to be in his desk at school. So we go on our next adventure. Arriving at the classroom and finding the homework, we feel the presence of a yokai nearby, and that's when Baku drops in out of nowhere. We do try to check up on them, though they get startled by us and start attacking us. Using a bit of violence to calm them down, they explain that they were hungry for dreams and were hanging out at the school because they thought there'd be students there to eat their dreams. But they chose the wrong time to do that because, well, we're in the middle of summer. Providing them with something to eat, whether they liked it or not, they become our friends, and becoming friends with them will soon open up night exploration for us, but all in due time. So with it getting late, we head back home. But as we're having an idle chat outside, the silhouette of a giant skeleton appears before us, and being scared, we run away back home. We have a small briefing about what we just saw until Mother tells us that dinner is ready, and here we get introduced to a new, as well as pointless, minigame? I say that with a question mark because I don't think there's any reward for doing this minigame. I was going to call this a rhythm minigame, however, you're not trying to match with the beat. I mean, it kinda works like it, where you're trying to correctly time the discs on the plate by pressing their corresponding buttons, but there's no beat you're trying to sync up to. It's all purely visual, and it finishes after like 30 discs appear. The reward for completing this? Nothing at all. You just get to look at some nice looking food. Also, this minigame is so pointless and entirely optional that after this, you'll probably go throughout the whole game never playing it again. As the way to do so, you'll have to be home during the evening. After some din-din, Whisper then suggests that we should upgrade our watch to befriend some stronger yokai to go against the yokai that we just saw at school. So the next day we head over to Timers and More to do so. Once we get there, we're stopped by a weirdo who's a yokai investigator. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this guy in the last video, but to recap, This is one of the side content that you can do where at certain locations there will be some yokai criminals. You'll chase them down to fight them and then turn them in for a reward. Now in this game you'll get an app to help you track down these yokais by giving you vague descriptions of where they're located, which is pretty nice. After that interruption, we try to go in the store, however it seems that Mr. Goodside isn't in right now. We're thankfully told by someone passing by where he currently is, so we head on over to a Wayfarer Manor. Though getting there, the landlord tells us that we just missed him, and he's now at the museum. However, before we go over there, we're again reintroduced to the feature that the manor provides. Again, this was in the last video, but TLDR, this uses the Street Pass feature and allows random yokais to appear to befriend. I would say that it's entirely useless like in the last video, however, due to updates in the 3DS modding community from earlier this year, there's an app that you can get called NetPass that's an online version of Street Pass. There are some videos about this that you can look up for more details, though I will again mention that you will need to mod your 3DS, which again, that's some research you have to do on your own. But at least it means that this isn't a completely useless feature, though that doesn't mean I used it in my playthrough, so there's that I guess. Aside from the manor, we also get another app called the Contacts app, which basically lets you see people's profiles that you've interacted with through the online feature, like trading, battling, or Street Pass. Okay, with all that covered, let's head to the museum. But actually, before going inside, there's a man you can talk to who's nearby to get another app. That app being the music app, which you can probably guess what it is. That is, being able to listen to the game's OST, though you'll have to buy them using music cards that you're able to randomly collect. Okay, now we can go inside the museum where we finally meet up with Mr. Goodside, who's reminiscing about the past. We tell him what we want and he's more than happy to help, but we have to wait until he's done and meet him back at the shop. So in the meantime, we're forced to do some side quests to progress the story. We immediately start one as we go back onto the first floor, where we're stopped by a woman who wants us to do a favor. So we follow her into the storage room, definitely not sus at all, where she begins explaining that she's researching these doors called Gates of Whimsy. She basically wants us to help her figure out what lies behind these doors since we're able to see them with our watch, which she somehow knows we're able to. She mentions that there's one that we could potentially access through in the front of the museum, so we go outside to check it out, and sure enough, we find it and go through it. To explain what they are, the Gates of Whimsies are doors that you can find in the overworld, though they are completely random as to when or where they'll be. Going through them, you'll have to complete a small challenge to complete them, which can involve fighting X amount of enemies, getting to exit quickly, fighting a strong yokai, or doing some arbitrary task. Upon completing the room, you are then rewarded with a random amount of gate globes. What are these used for? Well, after getting out of the room and spawning in a completely random location, going back to the gate at the museum, you insert these globes to lower the counter. I'm just gonna skip till I make this one 0. But once you do make it reach 0, then the door will finally be unlocked. As for this door, it opens to another room where 5 Gates of Whimsies appear before you. This is one of the major side contents of the game, where you will have to be grinding for these globes to open these doors, which will be annoying and tedious because, again, these doors are completely random. And to open all these doors, you will need to collect a total of 100 globes, so good luck grinding for that and better hope the reward is worth it. But after completing that quest, we become her assistant and do the whole gate quest as I've explained. So once done with that, let's move on to the next key quest that we need to do to continue the story. With that being the introduction to the fusion mechanic, which I will skip over because it's similar to the first game. Though I will say that it is nice that they actually decided to make this a quest that you have to do, because in the first game you had to go out of your way to find this, which I always found to be odd. I mean, sure, players would have eventually discovered it as you'd probably be around the area getting yokais, but again, very strange that they just decided to not tell players about it. For the final key quest, we go to Uptown Springdale and head on over to the community center, which is a location that had no importance in the first game, but now it sort of does. As in there, we meet with a man called Mr. Stickler, who gives us 2 new apps, with those being the Yokai Battle app and the Metal Swap app. Both of these are the online features for the game, with the Battle app letting you connect with other players around the world, or locally to battle it out. And this isn't something that was made with little to no thought, as they put a good amount of thought into it, with having players limit the amount of high rank yokais you use by only allowing 2 S ranks. Not only that, but it also has its own ranked mode, which I find surprising as with it being a children's game, I didn't think they had something like that. I mean, excuse me for the comparisons once more, but I don't even think Pokemon does that. I only say I think because I don't mess around with the online battles for Pokemon. But it's not only the addition of having a ranked mode that I feel like they put some thought into it, as they also have a side mode where you battle for points for your version of the game. It's these nice little touches that makes me think that the people who made this game really put in a lot of effort to put as much content as they can for this game compared to the first one. And you'll further agree with me on that statement the further we get into the game. Then as for the other app we get, the metal swapping, that's just a trading feature that was also in the first game, so nothing too special to talk about. Though I almost forgot to mention, but I'm pretty sure the PvP mode wasn't in the first game, so that was a nice addition for those who wanted that. So now that we've gone around completing those quests, it's time to head on over to Timers and More for our watch upgrade. But we're actually not done just yet, as we have to do another task for him this time. He wants us to go get his ancient herbs, which is a funny thing to call drugs, which is a huge no-no in the land of Nippon. That shit will get you wiped clean from existence from any form of media. I mean, look at the guy from Lost Judgment. Bro was caught with drugs and was entirely removed from the game. But we bring him his herbs, but then we're given another task from him to find a screwdriver. If you're thinking that this is needless padding for the sake of extending the game's runtime, then you and I are thinking the same thing. And it's not gonna be the only time it'll feel that way. To find a screwdriver, that sounds like an innuendo, it requires us to go to a shop that's only open at night, which, you know, is totally okay to let a kid roam around at night. Well, I guess it does take place in Japan, even if the localization says otherwise, so it might be somewhat okay to do that. But we won't be able to because at least Nate's parents care about his safety. So being stumped at what to do, that's when Baku shows up and explains to us again how they can resolve our issue. Just like how they did in the first game, but, you know, we're not meant to remember that or something. Later at night, Baku takes our place and we go to the shop to finally get the screwdriver. With our objective finally complete, all that's left is to wait until morning and... Yeah, I should have seen this coming. That's right, it's time for the return of Terror Time, which, if you've forgotten, is where we're trying to run away from the Oni yokai, Gargaros, and survive until a door appears before us to escape. But during it, we're able to loot chests to acquire items, and if you're a high enough level, or daring enough, you can even fight Gargaros. Now with this being the second game, they of course further expanded Terror Time with new additions. Looking at the footage, there'll probably be a couple of noticeable differences that you might have seen, with one of them being the removal of chests. So instead of searching for those chests, you're instead gathering those red orbs for a reward at the end of Terror Time. Though I'll save what that is for just a bit. The red orbs aren't the only thing that's scattered about, as this time they've added some usable items that you can pick up to help you survive longer in Terror Time. These items come in the form of Staminum, which lets you sprint longer, Signable Trap that stuns the eyeballs, Robo Fist that lets you shoot the eyes, and etc. Also, those eyeballs are the new enemies that you have to hide from that replaced the lead Oni from the last game. Then finally, the last change they made was that you're no longer able to fight Gargaros anymore. Instead, if you get caught by him, you just lose Terror Time and not get your reward for surviving. Speaking of rewards, collecting however many of the orbs, it all gets added up and turns into a coin for the Oni Krinkakai. So the more you collect, the better the rewards will be. These new updates to Terror Time makes it a bit more fun. However, there is something on top of this that gets introduced that is even more fun. Though I'll say what that is when we get to the end of the chapter, so for now, let's escape from here and get back to the shop to finally upgrade our watch. Once Mr. Goodset has finally finished tuning our watch, we are now able to befriend D-rank yokais, as well as open D-rank doors. With our watch upgraded, we're ready to take on the giant yokai that's lurking at the school. But before we continue, now that our watch is upgraded, I'd like to briefly talk about the upgrades. In the first game, I mentioned how after doing the story quest upgrade, the game allows us to continually upgrade our watch with no roadblock, aside from the strong yokais that you'll have to face to do the upgrade. However, in this game, they decided to not let you do that, as if you do try to go back to timers and more to upgrade the watch, there won't be a side quest available. The only time you're able to actually upgrade the watch is only when the story needs you to, which honestly sucks. I'm assuming they made this change so that players won't be able to just steamroll through the story with stronger yokais, but to me, it just feels more of a hindrance as it just roadblocks you from being able to explore more areas. Which could be another thing that they wanted players to not do as much, and probably wanted them to focus on a story first and then open more of the world to you in the post-game. I'm not sure, but it does make it so that you don't get to encounter some of the more unique yokais that can be found. Though a way to get around that would be to just use the coins that you get from the QR codes and passwords to get the higher rank yokais. I would say it's lame, but I did it, so it's not lame. Entering the school, the atmosphere is completely different, and not just because we're sneaking in at night, as the further we get inside, we start to hear some familiar clanking. That's when suddenly, a giant capsule begins rolling towards us, like that boulder scene from Indiana Jones. Actual somewhat relevant topic until this video is dated. These are going to be the main obstacles here that you're gonna have to be avoiding, and I gotta be honest, I'm not a big fan of this section. I wouldn't mind if it was just the capsules, as getting hit by them only takes you back to the beginning of the floor, or in the case of the first floor, back to the entrance. The way you're meant to avoid getting hit by them is by quickly getting inside a nearby classroom, though this is where the main issue I have with this section stems. Because in some of the classrooms, you'll be locked in there and 3 yokais will appear before you, where you'll have to target the one in the middle to escape. It's pretty annoying to be punished for simply being unlucky, but eventually we make it to the roof, where we'll encounter our first boss of the game, that first boss being Gutsy Bones. And a bit of a tangent here, but he's actually based on an actual yokai. Apart from the gotcha machine, of course. Now this boss has a few layers to it that you'll want to know, as the targeting cursor is important for this fight. If you decide to not do anything and let the auto battle do its own thing, then this fight will take you longer than it should. What you want to be targeting at the beginning here is the obvious bandage where his heart is. That's because doing enough damage to it makes it fall off, letting you attack its heart to dish out some big damage. That's the first part you want to be doing. The other is to prevent him from rolling that SSR unit that we want. I mean, come on, if we can't get that cute waifu, then why should he? But letting him do so lets him pull one of 4 types of capsules. The black capsule inspires the team we have out, the red one unleashes a strong fire attack, the green one heals your team, and finally the golden one makes him do his ultimate move. To prevent him from using any of these on us, we use the cursor and target the crow that delivers him the coin. Doing that makes him unable to pull for a capsule. Then with that, you should be able to defeat him in no time at all. With the issue resolved now, we finally get ready to head on home, until Nate starts to feel as if he's forgetting something, though Jubanyan just reassures him that it must have not been important, and so with that, we run home. Only to leave Whisper behind, still inside the capsule he got trapped in. Oh, Whisper. Actually, can he even breathe in there? Oh god. Nate, go back! Go back! He's gonna die in there! Go back! Also, before the game transitions over to the next chapter, also yes, Whisper is alive and well, we get a small cutscene where he tells us about a new app we get called Yokai Watch Blasters. If this sounds familiar, that's because this is where the spin-off game Yokai Watch Blasters Red Cat Corp and Blue Dog Squad originated from. That's right, this side mode became its own game because of how popular it was. I of course won't get into the spin-off games as that's a whole topic on its own, but of course if you do want me to go over those games then leave a comment saying so and support this video. But what I will do now is get a little bit more into the Yokai Watch Blasters app. Now, it works functionally the same as what happens in Terror Time, however instead of controlling Nate, you get to control whatever yokai you befriended. And the devs didn't go lazy with it where it doesn't matter who you play as, it actually somewhat matters because there are 3 roles that you can play, with those being the tank, attacker, or support role. Because there are different roles that you can play as, This mode of course has online and local multiplayer to team up with randos or with friends. But if you don't have any friends, like I don't, then you can go solo with it. Though there isn't an option for that, instead when searching for other people, you have to immediately start the game before anyone joins. Though you don't really have to worry about that anymore since the online is dead. Rip the 3DS. Getting into the game, it again works functionally similar to Terror Time, but you aren't just running around trying to avoid getting detected. Rather, you are able to attack enemies, but don't get too cocky because they can dish out damage out to you as well. Though of course, these enemies will be weak and can be easily defeated. Where the real challenge comes from are the random boss encounters. Before I continue on that note though, I want to preface this by saying that there are two versions of Yokai Watch blasters that Psychic Specters make sure to point out and include. The difference isn't on how they play, but rather the content that they have, specifically regarding the bosses you encounter. The original version, which was in both copies, only had Gargaros and the other Onis as the bosses that you encounter. That itself is pretty lame because that was pretty much the same thing as the Onis that you can fight in Yokai Watch's Terror Time, so a bit of a disappointment. Though that's where Psychic Spectre comes in, with new content by adding more bosses that you can possibly face, while also adding in some new rewards that you can get. This version of Yokai Watch Blasters is definitely the one you want to play, especially with friends. I myself wasn't able to get a group together to play it because I have no friends. But from what I am able to remember playing, I did have some fun playing it, so it is worth checking it out. And if you did like playing this game mode, then I would recommend playing the Blaster spin-off. Okay, with that mostly explained, it's time to move on to the next chapter. The chapter starts with us running on an errand when we suddenly hear two girls talking about a recent rumor of things becoming big out of nowhere. Our pondering then gets interrupted by a scream, and when looking at what the commotion is, we witness the rumor firsthand. That's when suddenly a giant cat yokai covered in mushrooms appears before us, who is the cause of the giantification of things. The giant yokai then notices us, but most importantly our Yokai Watch, and then rambles about searching for a bold basher like us. It then starts warning us about a crisis that's about to happen, and that their friend needs our help, to which then they zap us, causing us want to go to Harrisville. This is where the main plot of Yokai Watch 2 finally begins, so no more tutorial slice of life events. Cutting over to the next part though, Nate is packing up for his trip to visit his grandma at Harrisville. Man, that yokai really had to pull all the stops to make Nate visit his grandma. Poor Oba-chan. Though before we go to the train station to head off to Grandma's, we need to pick up some donuts for her as Jibanyan decided to be cheeky and eat some donuts that were meant for her. But before heading off to do just that, we speak with Jibanyan after his obsessive gushing over next Harmioni. Oh my. Come on man, get with the times. It's all about Hatsune Miku now. Pfft, fucking amateur dude. Aside from his amateurness, he gives us the weather app, which is pretty self-explanatory as to what it does, but it's slightly important to check up as there are some yokais and I think a few quests that are available during certain weather conditions. Also, the reason why Jibanyan has this app is because the Weather Girl is one of the members of Next Harmony. God, that's so hard to say for some reason. Moving on, since we're able to move around freely, I decided to do a few things before continuing the story, with one of them being to go to the bathhouse. That's because outside of it is a baffle board, where upon guessing the correct yokai and summoning it, that being Washogun, you get access to a series of quests to unlock a rare yokai. Who is that yokai? Well, it's none other than Sproink, who, if you remember, was the second boss from the first game. Yes, you can befriend a boss yokai in the sequel, and it's not just him, as SV Snaggerjab, Slimeamander, and Wobblewalk are able to be befriended. But to get them, they all revolve around completing some quests, which may or may not be in the post-game. However, for the bathhouse one, you can complete before beating the main game. Though, I can't really tell you how good Sproink is. Moving on to the next thing I did, going to the apartments at Sharper's Row, you'll find a Rough Raff and a Cough Cough arguing with each other about who's the pointiest. Whatever that means. Deciding as to who is will make that yokai fuse with Jibanyan, giving you either Badinyan or Thornyan. But don't worry, you won't be losing your original Jibanyan from that out-of-nowhere fusion. Also, it's not like you can't get the other in the same save file. You can get both of these yokais in the wild. You just get a freebie for doing this without giving up your Jibanyan. Back to our main objective, we get our donuts, go back home, and rest up for the trip to Harrisville. When the day comes, we say our goodbyes to our parents while also getting directions from our mom and head off to the train station. Man, letting a 10-year-old kid go on a long trip by himself would not happen in the US. Now, another thing before I move on, as I was exploring and doing side quests again, I want to share another rare yokai encounter that you'll want to know about. This is going to be one of the many spawn locations that will show up, but if you go to downtown Springdale and inside the Academy building, a yokai by the name of Snoddle will be there. Now seeing him, you want to save before battling him, as failing to befriend him will make him disappear, making you have to search for him all over again. Think of it as sort of a legendary encounter. Now for the other thing I want to quickly mention, and this will be at the train station where we need to go, but there'll be a yokai with a quest that you want to start for something cool. The yokai is a movie director and they want you to search for specific NPCs to be in this movie. He does give you some descriptions as to what they look like, and it should be pretty obvious for the most part as to which NPCs they are since we've interacted with them before. But for now, I'll hold off on that and continue with the story. So now it's time to get on the train, and oh boy, I'll tell you now, you better embrace your inner train otaku because this train is gonna be your friend for a good portion of the game. Using the train will work similarly to how it works in Japan, I assume, where you buy a day pass and you're free to use the train as many times you want for that day only. Then for the next endgame day, you'll have to purchase it again. Also, I say to get used to it in that way because riding the train takes a hot minute to get from one destination to another, at least for this portion of the game, as the game doesn't immediately take you to where you need to go. No, you have to sit there and stop at every train station and select no to not get off at the wrong stop. And it could possibly take you minutes to get to your destination. I'll even let the whole ride to Harrisville play just so you can see. But aside from getting from one place to another, the use for riding the train more than once is for the extra stuff that you can get. This quest is available in the next chapter, I think, but there's a quest where you enter a stamp rally where you need to get every stamp at every train stop. And I mean every train stop. This is the most boring and most time-consuming quest in the game, and as for the reward, it's not really worth the hassle as you get an unlimited train pass, meaning that you get to ride the train absolutely for free, but it's not completely worth it since buying a day pass costs only $3. Also, you will just unlock fast travel later on, so it just kinda makes it obsolete. You only want to do this quest if you hate yourself and want to be a completionist. Not the completionist, but a completionist. I'm sure you don't want to be that guy. But yeah, that's one of the extras for the train. The other thing is for the rare robo-yokais that are at specific train stops. These rare yokais aren't something you'll naturally encounter throughout the game. Rather, they're yokais you'll only be able to start encountering by getting the key items from inserting the passwords at the post office. Then, once you get these items, they'll then be located at specific train stations where, just like Snoddle, you want to stay beforehand before fighting them. Not because they'll move to another location upon being defeated, but because you can only fight them once a day. And I don't mean like an in-game day, but like an actual day. Then finally, the other stuff is going to be some post-game related stuff that I'll mention at the end, as well as the other locations that you can visit. So yeah, I mean it when I say that you'll be friends with it. But although I make it sound like a complete hassle, which, don't get me wrong, it kinda is, there's a nice relaxing charm to it when you first use it, as when you're making your way towards Harrisville, you get to see the slow change of the environment, from the bustling city to the more relaxing and beautiful looking scenery of the Japanese countryside that the game nicely gets. Which would make sense since the game is made in Japan, or takes place in Japan, but it also makes it all the stranger as, if you remember, the localization of this game makes it so you're in America, but then you get greeted by all these things that aren't something you'll find in America, with the most blatant one being the giant Buddha statue, which is an actual thing in Japan. Though there are a few of them, so I don't know which one it's referencing in particular. Probably the one in Kamakura since that's the largest one and it's also outside, so I'll just go with that one. Another thing that you can find charming or possibly bothersome, depending on what happens, are the random events that happen within the train. These go from having a simple chat with an NPC or yokai, with them then giving you an item, a chat with Whisper in Jibanyan, or the most bothersome, a random yokai battle. It's kinda nice as you're wondering what sort of thing will happen when riding the train, with some encounters being rarer than others. Okay, I think I've pretty much said all I wanted to with the train, so let's see where we're at. Don't know if I made it to Harrisville yet, but if not, I'm just gonna pretend I did. And we made it to our stop. And now it's time to see Grandma. We'll first need to get on the bus, but after that, we finally reach our destination where our Grandma is there waiting for us. After having a small chit-chat, we're then forced to follow her back home, where she moves incredibly slow, which in part is due to her being old. The following does get broken up with some little conversations with the locals, but it won't take you long to pull up some subway surfers. I'm sure this was added for you to subtly get introduced to the village, but I can't help but think that this was added as another way to pad out the game. Though we eventually do make it to her house, where we go inside to pay our respects to our grandpa. We do get to see a glimpse of him, and might I say, he looks a tad bit familiar. Yeah, maybe I'm overthinking it. After doing that, we're given free reign to explore Harrisville, while also having to do some quests to progress with the story. Now for these quests that we need to complete, only one of them is actually important to know about, and that's sorcery. To try and boil this down, you can sacrifice one of your yokais to create a soul gem, which you can equip to one of your yokais to give them a buff. Aside from creating soul gems, you can also fuse 2 soul gems together to strengthen one of them. Because of that, there are 2 very special fusions that you can make, and what I feel like are the important ones that you should try to get. This first one is the Superstar Soul, which I will say will require a good amount of grinding, as you will need to fuse a Cupid Soul and a Pinkapoo Soul together. A Cupid Soul shouldn't be too hard to get, however a Pinkapoo will, as you will need a Schmoopy, which that part also isn't too hard, but you'll then need to get a fusion item. That being the Love Scepter, which you can get at Jungle Hunter, but for the good price of 750 points. That means you'll have to do a shit ton of bug and fish catching. Though, there is another way to get those points, and it's by the means of money. And who said money doesn't solve everything? This method will need you to go to the fish market and buy around, $150 worth of carps, and then bring them to Jungle Hunter to trade them in for points, which should be enough for the Love Scepter. Once you've got these 2 yokais ready, bring them to the Temple of Harrisville, sacrifice both of them, bye money, and then fuse the Pinkapoo Soul with the Cupid Soul. And be sure to fuse them in that order, because if you do it in reverse, then you just wasted however long to just get a dud. But once you do get the Superstar Soul, that soul gem will help increase your odds of befriending yokais. I'm not exactly sure how much it increases the odds, but it'll definitely help. Especially if you have a yokai like Cupid Soul or Schmoopy in your party, as they too help increase the odds. Or even Pinkapoo, but you know, you just fused them away, so yeah. Now as for the other soul gems you get, comes from sacrificing these yokais on screen. The soul gems that they give you are XP boosters, which will make grinding a whole lot easier, and let me tell you, you want to get these as soon as possible for the post game. And that's pretty much all the advice I have to give for the sorcery. But I'm sure there are other important or useful gems to have, and if that's the case, I'm sure someone in the comments will tell me so. Which, hey, I'm sure those comments telling me so will help someone else out. If they're needing advice for a game that's 8 years old. 8 years. Damn, I'm old. But back to the story. Upon completing the 3 quests, we get a cutscene where we hear a mysterious voice calling out for help from the mountaintop. So, being the good Samaritans that we are, we go and answer that cry for help. We find out that it was a Mirapo that was calling for help, who, if you remember from the first game, is the yokai that was our fast travel mechanic. So I'm sure you can guess what we're going to unlock. Helping them out, we befriend them and of course unlock our fast travel mechanic, which I think is introduced to us way earlier than the last game. We then get interested in seeing the view on the top of the mountain, so we climb up where it suddenly begins raining. Though that's when we get introduced to a legendary yokai, but not that type of legendary, Palisoul, as they protect us from the rain. Though they don't stick around for long as they suddenly disappear. But having seen the nice view and with it getting late, we decide to head back to Grandma's where we once again, but for the final time, play that dinner minigame. We head to bed but are then interrupted by Jibanyan needing to go to the bathroom, which we go with them until we hear another cry for help from another yokai. Helping them out and asking why they were being bullied, the yokai mentions that it has to do with her being with the bonies and them being fleshies. Not quite understanding what this means for now, we befriend them and head back to sleep. You'd think this would be where the chapter ends, but nope. It continues with us waking up to find Grandma screaming as the donuts we got her are growing in size. Sort of like what we saw at Shopper's Row from the last chapter. We then chase the donuts outside where it ends up going inside the shed. As we're about to chase it inside, A voice comes out of nowhere saying that they've been waiting 60 years for us to show up. Unveiling who the yokai is, it's of course the one we've seen before, and after pulling them out of the shed they were stuck in, it says that its name is Mega Nyan. Like Mega Nyan, not Megan Nyan. Just to clarify. Not only that, but it then starts a battle with us to test our strength. Although the fight is framed as a boss fight, it's not that tough and you can beat it under a minute. After the fight, Whisper then inspects the yokai and finds an air valve on it. Upon opening the valve, the yokai then turns into its true form.
I am Hovernyon!
The yokai's true form is Hovernyon, and then he goes into detail about how long he's been waiting for us to show up, and then starts explaining his reasoning for needing to meet us, saying that he needs our help to save his friend, someone that we supposedly have a deep bond with. And the chapter ends with that cliffhanger, with a bit of a gag at the end. After eating his fill, Hovernyon further explains that the person who we need to help is none other than our grandpa, Nathaniel Adams. To do that, he needs us to travel back 60 years into the past, and with no hesitation, he uses a time stone to do just that. Now being in past Harrisville, Hovernyon tells us that we should look for Nathaniel to confirm for ourselves that we are in fact in the past. Though as we're looking for him, we're stopped by someone who's inspirited by a yokai that we're unable to see. And just as things seem to be getting worse, someone comes to our rescue.
There it is! A wicked one! Here I come! Moxie!
Watch this!
Our mysterious, but not so mysterious, savior beats the daylights out of Whisper, causing the evil yokai to leave. The person then does a Kamen Rider or Super Sentai pose, as well as reveal their name to be Maximus Max, and then they dash away. With that over with, we continue with our search as we head towards Nathaniel's hideout. Upon entering the hideout, we find out that the person who called themselves Maximus Max was indeed Nathaniel himself. Hovernyon explains to Nathaniel who we are and that we're here to help. However, he just rejects our help and prefers to do things himself. Kind of a lone wolf. You could say he has two wolves inside of him, but I won't go into details. He even goes as far as to say that Hovernyon isn't his friend, and then he storms off. We try chasing after him only to immediately lose him, so we go back into the hideouts to learn more about him, like his love for Maximus Max. But, looking around, we discover the most important thing. That being a design sheet of what Hovernyon explains is the first ever yokai watch. Okay, time for some lore. So if you remember from the first game, it was mentioned that Mr. Goodsight's family were the ones that created the yokai watch, but these few lines now contradict that. It even goes as far as to name dropping a new character named Steve Jobs, which, if you can't tell, is a parody of Steve Jobs, founder of Apple, as being the one known for creating the watch. Also, if this was released today, I wonder how many kids would know exactly who Steve Jobs is. Don't know if I should be feeling old or not. Though Nathaniel is the one who created the watch, we're at the time before he has created it. Hovernyon then goes on to further explain that with the watch, we'll be able to fight the wicked yokai, the one that we encountered before but couldn't see. Because of that feature, we end up deciding to finish gathering the parts needed to complete the watch. So to Old Springdale we go. But before we leave, we get told by Hovernyon that the stone he used to transport us back to the past can't be used anymore. However, there is a yokai that can take us back to the present. Doing some scanning, we find Miradox, who's the yokai that Hovernyon was talking about. Now being friends with him, we're able to travel back and forth from the past to the present. Though I will say that for now, this is the only Miradox that we can use, which will be annoying having to make your way here each time you feel like traveling through time. Though there is another Miradox that can be accessed near the community center where we had that online battle tutorial, but I think that one can only be accessed until later, or I could be wrong and you can access it immediately when you get to Old Springdale. Once we're there, it's time to get through the key quest for the watch parts. I won't focus too much on them as they aren't important, except for one, as it introduces the leader of the Bony Spirits, Arachnus. That's pretty much it for them, but instead of continuing with the story, I'm going to take this time to talk about a bit of the other content that you can do during this downtime. Going back to the present, if you go to the shrine on Mount Wildwood, you can find Komo-san chilling there, admiring the shrine. This, I think, is the beginning of several encounters that you can have with him called Traveling Komo-san. This whole series of events is actually based off of the sort of same side series from the anime. Actually, I don't know if the anime did it first, but I'm gonna say it did because some of the things in this game does take a few things from the anime, with this being one of them. But as for the Traveling Komo-san event, nothing much of note happens. Komo-san yaps about the scenery and then gives us an item. I'm not exactly sure how many of these encounters there are, as I didn't go out of my way to see them all, nor do I know if there's a reward for finding every spot. Now for the next thing to do, I think it's time to revisit the filmmaker Yokai's quest, and find all the actors he's searching for. Instead of going in depth about it, I'm just gonna list the people that you need to find for the movie. So in no particular order, you have to talk to Mr. Zen, Detective Holdit, Deanna Gately, Miss Frost, and Mr. Stickler. After finding them, we get sent to the film location where we are going to star in this next movie. Yup, time to bust out the acting skills. Step back, Cillian Murphy, Robert Downey Jr., and Bryan Cranston, as I'm gonna be the one to shake the entire acting world. At least that's what I would say if the whole thing wasn't just a tag minigame. Though once all of that is done, the director rewards us with a new app called the Movies app. From the name, you might be able to guess what you can do with it, which is to watch previously seen cutscenes. Whether that be from the animated ones from completing quests, to the 3D cutscenes, but those alone aren't much of a reward. It's nice to be able to watch them at any time, however the real reward for doing this quest is the Movies Material app. Which might be a bit confusing at first, but if you remember, sometime after the release of Psychic Specters, then you know that there was a Yokai Watch movie that was released. That movie being called Yokai Watch the Movie, which is just an adaptation of this game's story, so nothing too big. But with this app, you get to see the concept art for some of the characters and yokais that were in the movie, as well as seeing storyboards and key art for some of the locations in the movie. This is a cool reward to get if you're not only into the movie, but if you're also into animation in general and behind the scenes stuff. So when I found out about it in this playthrough, I personally found it to be cool. Then finally, for the last thing that's notable to mention, is going to downtown Springdale, but specifically the construction site and activating that place's baffleboard. Upon putting the yokai Mochismo there, it will make the construction worker more motivated to work, and upon waiting 3 actual days, yes, I'm serious, then the building will finally be complete. Inside of it will be a gym where you can do challenge battles, and also train your yokais to increase certain stats for them. This is definitely something to use if you're someone wanting to get into the Yokai Watch competitive scene, if that existed, but if not, then it's kinda pointless. At least that's how I see it. So with all that covered, it's safe to go back to the main story. We return to the hideout to find Nathaniel there again, and we tell him how we gathered all the materials needed to make the watch. He's reluctant to help us out, as again, he'd rather be alone, 2 wolves inside of him, but that's when Hovering convinces him that we're more than just his future grandson, as we're his bold basher, Maximus's sidekick. With that in mind, he decides to help us out and makes the first ever Yokai Watch. With him slowly opening himself to us, the chapter ends. So yeah, pretty short chapter when it comes to the narrative side, however, for the content side of things, there's a good amount of stuff to do. And you'll want to be doing the side content stuff, as you'll be wanting to get more stronger for the later part of the game. The chapter starts with Nathaniel having finished making the Yokai Watch Model 0. At first you might not think much about it, only thinking that it will just be used for story purposes like seeing the wicked yokai. However, there are some new gameplay additions to it as well, mainly when it comes to battles. When in battle, if you press the middle circular area, it'll switch to the Model 0 mode, where the Ultimate and Target buttons change. The Ultimate button changes to M scale, and what this does is make the yokai's ultimate much stronger, though at the cost of using up the other yokai's soul meter. The ones that are out, of course. Now this has its uses in certain scenarios, However, I personally didn't use this as much as I didn't see much use for it. I'm not saying that it's entirely useless, as again, I'm sure there are moments where using this is applicable, but I feel like the ultimates from the other yokais I had were pretty good on their own, and I sometimes needed to juggle between them for certain fights. So because of that, I again didn't feel like I needed to use their M skills. Now for the other change, that being the target button to poke, I did find myself using that quite a lot, especially when it came to befriending yokais. The poke mechanic is useful when the yokai you're fighting is inspirited, as with poke, you can get one of 4 things out of it, those being damage to it, money, sulfur meter, or the one you mainly want to get, friendship points. How this works is when they're inspirited, you press poke and then target them, and then start tapping them on the bottom screen in specific areas to get one of the 4 things I mentioned you can get. You only get a few seconds to do it, and trying to get the specific one you want can be a bit frustrating at times because you really have to be precise with it. Now running out of time isn't the end of it, as you could try again. Though again, if they're still inspirited or, you know, not dead. But when it comes to what you want to aim for, it's gonna be the friendship bonus for sure. The other stuff is nice, but realistically, you're not gonna find yourself using the other stuff on regular enemies. Maybe the money bonus, and when it comes to the bosses, you can inspirit them. So those are my 2 cents on it. Other than that, we actually get something else along with the watch, and that's the summoning app. Not the most mind-blowing thing to get, but it's a nice app to mess with, as with some of the new yokais that were added, specifically the classic yokais, they have a different method of summoning than the OG ones, or I guess I should say the non-classic yokais. The non-classic ones of course get summoned by inserting the metal into the watch, while the Model 0, you turn the dial to confirm the summon, and then properly summon it. Bit of an extra step with it, but it has a nice design, so that makes it up for it. Back to the story, Nathaniel gives the watch to us because he explains that he doesn't have any yokai friends, and he walks off the train. Hubrion chases after him, and we proceed to catch up to both of them. Though we're only able to find Hubrion alone, and wondering why Nathaniel's like this, Hubrion shows off some bottle caps to us that are from yokais that wanted to be friends with Nathaniel. Whisper seeing the name of a yokai he recognizes, we decide to look for them since they're not far from where we are. Though once we do find where they are, we find that they've been turned to stone due to a curse that Keen and Gin place on them, as Hubrion explains. He further explains that it wasn't just him, but also the other yokais that wanted to be Nathaniel's friend. Just as everyone is feeling sad, that's when Whisper pulls a Deus Ex Machina, as he conveniently has a potion called Rockaway that should remove the curse. But it only ends up working for like a second, as Fox Kappa then turns back into a stone. Thinking that there's no chance of breaking the curse, that's when Hubrion mentions Palisol's name, and we're reminded of having met them in our time. With that spark of hope, Hubrion gives us the bottle caps and tells us to break the curse in our time in hopes of being able to bring them back. So now it's time to hunt them down in our time and break that curse. But I'm just gonna skip over them as they just revolve around removing their curse and then doing some simple tasks to then befriending them. Instead, I'll again take this downtime to talk about something else, with this time being the Infinite Tunnel at Harrisville. I'm not exactly sure if this was accessible in the previous chapter, but in the top right of the map of Harrisville, there'll be an icon labeled Tunnel, and along with it, there'll be a save point. At this point you should know that this has to mean something, and you'll be right, because interacting with the sign or tunnel, you'll get a prompt asking if you want to enter, as mentioned earlier, the Infinite Tunnel. The game will warn you that there's no leaving the tunnel once you enter, nor are you able to save inside of it, which is why it makes you save before entering. And I will say that it is worth taking these precautions because, for the most part, at least as far as I know, it's pretty random as to how long the tunnel is, or at least it's unknown how far you can go. The inside of the tunnel is pretty bare, though the emptiness will be broken up by the appearance of random NPCs who, if you talk to, will either ask you a question or just say something. But it's not just NPCs that you'll encounter, as there are some yokais that'll appear who you can fight, as well as there being some vending machines that'll give you an item. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that on the top left of the screen is a counter that counts how far you've gotten in the tunnel, which is why I say it's pretty unknown how far you can get. Though it's not completely endless, because at some point you will reach the end, to which the game will record how far you've gotten in the tunnel, which I'm not sure what other sorts of things you can encounter in it for there to be a point in making it far. Though trying to find out what purpose there is to the tunnel, I was able to find that going through it a certain number of times unlocks a quest for you. As for the reward for that quest, it's pretty much nothing. You meet a ghost or yokai, but it's left unknown because they don't give you a yokai medal at the end of it, so it could be a ghost, I don't know. But overall, there isn't much of a point going through all that unless you really want to experience everything and or complete every quest. But I will say that it is worth checking it out at least once, just to experience it and see how far you can get. The next thing to talk about is the Legend of the Nokotopia encounters. So at some random locations, I'm sure they're predetermined, but at these locations you'll find a Noko who, as soon as you get into their field of view, runs away. What you're supposed to do is chase after them and talk to them, to which you'll get rewarded with a Noko orb. Sort of like the Komo-san traveling events, but with this you actually get rewarded with something important. And if you do manage to find all 8 of the Nokos, then you're told to go somewhere to then get your reward for doing all of this. That reward is a 5-star coin for the Crankai for you to get the rare Panda Noko. Not sure if he's any good, but it's definitely for the completionists out there, and it's a rare one, so have fun tracking him down. Now for another side quest event, if you go to Excellent Tower, you'll visit here for the story, you'll meet a boy who looks familiar if you've seen the anime. Talking to them, they reveal themselves to be the yokai Kyubi, and as I've mentioned in the last Yokai Watch video, from this point on after the airing of the anime, his personality sort of changes, at least how I see it. Where he seemed like a cunning genius, now he's more of a charmer, just like in the anime where he's after the hearts of people. No, not like in Persona 5, but this quest is similar to that side series in the anime, but instead of trying to go after Katie, the girl character that you could have played as, you're trying to find specific NPCs that could be charmed, by him specifically. And let me tell you, this side quest can be a hassle to complete, because finding all these NPCs is difficult without a guide. They're of course going to be the ones that have character images when you talk to them, which some of them won't be hard to find, but there are some that just are. And I'm gonna be honest with you, it's not worth doing this. The reward is kinda dog water. The way that the game frames the reward makes it seem like this is how you befriend Kyubi, but you don't. What's also worse is that you need to collect 10 of these, but when you do, Whisper suggests that you get an extra 10 for a better reward. But don't fall for the bait. The better reward is still not worth it. What's even more worse is that the quest ends with a teacher from the last game who has the same color scheme as Kyubi, walking up to Kyubi and taking all the orbs from him, making it ambiguous as to whether or not that teacher is a yokai in disguise and is the great Kyubi that Kyubi mentions. So I guess that's something, but once again, it's not worth it, unless you have that completionist brain. Now for the final thing before going back to the main story, I just want to talk about this one side quest as it's kinda special and strange looking back on it. To find this quest, go to the shrine of Mount Wildwood at night, I think. That's how I found it at least. And by the stairs you'll find a Mirapo. Talking to it, Mirapo would then send you somewhere strange where it's still the same location, but there's a summer festival going on. This is nice as here you can get some good food to help with getting yokais and for healing. But what's more important is up ahead at the shrine, because that is where we'll meet the yokai Don-chan. We fight him because he's keeping people here in this endless summer festival, but once we beat him, he explains that he wanted to have fun and make the people who come into the summer festival happy. He also explains that they're not stuck here forever, as they can leave whenever, while also being happy. With that, the quest is over, but why we wanted to do this quest is because after it, we have the opportunity to befriend him. Though we only get one attempt at it per day, so save before attempting so, and if you don't get them, reload and try again. Aside from Don-chan being a rare yokai that we can get, I wanted to mention him because if you didn't know, Don-chan isn't an original yokai for this game. Instead, they're a character that exists outside of this series and has their own series called Taiko no Tatsujin, owned by Bandai Namco. If you haven't heard of this game, then I'm sure you've probably seen it in conventions or videos of Japanese arcades, but it's an arcade rhythm game where you play on taiko drums, which is a Japanese instrument that is normally played in festivals. But as for the arcade game itself, it's really fun. If you ever have the opportunity to find an arcade machine for it, then play it. Or just get the game on Switch or PS5, 4, whichever. Though if you want this sort of authentic experience, then you'll have to fork over some extra cash for the mini taiko drums that they made for the game. Still a fun game though. But yeah, I just find this collab to be interesting, and I tried looking up anything about it, but couldn't find anything. There's probably a Japanese gaming article that goes over it, or probably in an issue of Korokoro magazine, but I'm not sure. Though this isn't the only collab in this game if you weren't aware, because there's another quest for a yokai who wants to be a mascot, and in that quest, we find this mascot, Kumamon, that he's inspired to become. When I first played this game, I didn't think much about Kumamon, and thought it was just a weird mascot they made for the game, but believe it or not, it's an actual mascot in Japan. Okay, time for some Japan lore that I'm totally qualified to talk about. So as far as I know, Japan really loves their mascots, and in most prefectures in Japan, they all have their own mascots to attract tourists. This first example, while not a prefecture mascot, I just wanted to mention because I've seen them everywhere as a kid and never knew their origin, but this guy who's named Domo-kun is actually the mascot of NHK. This just blew my mind while looking into this because, again, I've seen this bastard everywhere as a kid, and growing up, I sort of learned that they had some part in the anime culture, but I just didn't know their origin was a mascot for the NHK. Just wild. But for some actual mascot examples, there's Hikonian for the city of Hikon in the Shiga prefecture, Kaparu for the city of Shiki in the Saitama prefecture. Look at that, I roped yokai into this. Melankuma for the city of Yubari in the Hokkaido prefecture, and lastly, Shinjo-kun for the city of Susaki in the Kochi prefecture. Okay, tangent, but this last mascot might seem familiar, right? Well, that's because this is the mascot that the famous Japanese meme mascot on Twitter, Cheetan, is based off of. Look, that's a whole rabbit hole that I could get into, but this isn't the video for it. All I'll say is that Cheetan is not the original mascot for Susaki, and please Cheetan, acknowledge me! But to rub this all back to Kumamon, he's actually the mascot for the entirety of the Kumamoto prefecture, who goes around spreading the good word of Kumamoto. He was pretty popular in Japan, though I'm not sure if he still is today, but he apparently was popular enough to be in Yokai Watch 2. I only say I'm unsure of his popularity because he does have his own YouTube channel and the videos uploaded there barely get 1k views, which means I could relate to him, to an extent. But yeah, these collabs with other popular characters sort of shows how popular and dominant Yokai Watch became in Japan back in 2014-15. Okay, that's enough tangents, now we can get back to the game. So after unpetrifying the yokais and finding a boss for one of them, we're then transitioned over to Nathaniel training, and we're given an explanation through a flashback as to why he wants to get stronger and prefers to be alone. With that shown to us, we're back to Nate, and it's time for us to go back to past Harrisville and meet up with Nathaniel to give him the good news. Once back at the base, we first report to Hubrinon of our accomplishments, though our joy is then interrupted by a sudden voice, and that's when Kin and Gin appear before us. Hubrinon gives Nate and the others a quick rundown as to who they are, and they soon come charging at us to put a stop to us. For this boss fight, it isn't going to be that challenging, though there is a gimmick that they do that will trip you up at first, but it won't take long for you to get around it. So since you're facing two opponents, your first thought is to maybe target one of them first, which normally you would be correct. However, if you do go with that approach, then when you do defeat one of them, what will happen is that the other enemy you didn't target will bring back the other and they'll recover a bit over 75% of their health. Which will then make you conclude that you need to defeat both of them at the same time, which you'd be correct. However, there is another trick that you can do. See, when you defeat one of them, the other yokai will bring out the time stone and bring the other back to life. You might see where I'm going with this. What you can actually do is use the target button and tap on a stone to make them drop it, which will prevent them from reviving the other yokai, leaving them vulnerable for a second. But either way you do it, you'll get the job done and beat them. Though after the fight is done, they recover themselves, and as soon as they're getting ready to hurt us, that's when Nathaniel comes rushing in to save us. Though he gets pushed away and they start targeting him. But that's when suddenly the yokais that we rescued show up to save Nathaniel. With his party form, they're able to subdue Kin and Gin, and that's when Nathaniel gives them the walloping they deserve, and they disappear. With all of that over with, we thank Nathaniel for his help, to which he tells us that we need to do some training to get better. And what does that training entail? Why, making some tokusatsu poses, of course. Why? Because why not? This then transitions us to our next minigame, which is sort of similar to the dinner minigame, where it's sort of a rhythm minigame. You know, I was thinking of having the footage speak for itself, but the minigame lasts for a bit over a minute, and I don't feel like letting the whole thing play out. Or do I?
Let's go! Moxie, good job! Moxie, keep it up! Moxie, nice! Moxie, yeah, you got it! Moxie, well done! Moxie, nailed it! Moxie, all right! Moxie, Maximus! Moxie, defender of all! Moxie, good job! Moxie, keep it up! Moxie, nice! Moxie, yeah, you got it! Moxie, nailed it! Moxie, all right! Moxie! 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 Maximus Mass, the invincible champion!
Yeah, it's something to say the least. But with that, the chapter ends. But not really, as we get a small cutscene of Kin and Gin talking to who seems to be their leader. And what's weird is that this whole cutscene is fully voice acted. And not only that, but it's the only one that is voice acted. That is, when it comes to the in-game cutscenes. The pre-rendered ones are of course voice acted. I think what they did was grab the voice lines from the movie and just added it here because, if I'm remembering correctly, this exact scene and those lines are in the movie. But that's just my game theory, and with that, the chapter actually ends.
We must act quickly to get rid of it once and for all. Dun dun dun! Dun 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 dun!
The next chapter starts with Nate, back at home, watching the weather broadcast warning that there's a typhoon coming. Though it then goes on to share that the change in weather from being sunny to cloudy is strange, though we ignore it and go back to our room where Whisper and Jibonyan do some exercise. I think they're playing like Miku Fitness Boxing or something, I don't know. Nate begins to get annoyed at how loud they're being and starts going off at them, especially at Jibonyan, going as far as to call him a freeloader. Then Whisper just gives him PTSD by reminding him of what his owner, when he was alive, called him. This obviously upsets him and tension grows between Nate and him, so much so that he pulls a Morgana and runs away. Man, everything could just be made a Persona 5 reference, huh? The cutscene ends and we're tasked with completing key quests to continue with the story, and one of those key quests is to find Jibonyan and to apologize to him. Though it's actually more than that, as in this key quest, we play as Jibonyan and see more of his backstory than what we did in the first game. But first we need to find him, and once we do, we find him searching for another owner to live with. Nate at first is okay with him leaving, but then changes his mind, sort of for the wrong reasons though. As he's talking to Whisper about this, Kin and Gin suddenly show up to target Jibonyan. They hit him with a time-traveling attack and send him back to when he was alive. Now playing as Jibonyan, we go around the old house he used to live in, looking for Amy, his owner. We find her downstairs arguing with her mother until it's revealed that Esmeralda is inspiriting the mom. Jibonyan tries warning Amy about the yokai, but is unable to, due to him being a normal cat. Also, I'd like to point out that Jibonyan's name when he was alive was Rudy. If you know why I'm pointing this out, you know. Anyways, seeing Amy being nice to him makes him wonder why she called him lame in the first place. But that thought gets put aside as they spend some quality time together. Then on the third day as they go out again, Amy's friends call out to her from across the sidewalk. And as she begins running across the road, a familiar scene plays. But before she gets isekai'd, time stops for Jibonyan. Goddamn, bro not only takes Rudy as his name, but also tries stealing Dio's stand. Shake my head. No, he didn't gain some stand ability. this is actually due to Gin and Kin, who give Jibanyan an ultimatum to either die again and to live as a yokai, or do nothing so that he could continue to live. Although they think this will be a tough choice for him, he immediately replies that he'll always sacrifice himself for Amy, to which he does so. Pretty hardcore for level 5 to just straight up show a death scene in the game. Even if it does flashbang the moment of impact, you could still make clear what happened. That means so far, Yokai Watch has more death scenes in its games compared to Pokemon, as the farthest they go with death is Lavender Town and the creepypasta-esque ghost encounters. Well, if you want to make a stretch as to a death scene in Pokemon, then there's that game theory about you killing Blue's Raticate, but again, that's just a game theory. Back to Jibanyan, with now having remembered the events of his death, he then is able to fully hear what Amy said. She never thought that he was lame, rather that it's lame that she'll never get to be with him ever again. She's then able to see Jibanyan, and they say their farewell to each other, and then he's sent back to his time. He reunites with Nate, and they apologize to each other and make up. That is until they have another argument, ending the quest. Honestly, a pretty cool quest as we get to play as someone other than Nate, and we get to learn a bit more about Jibanyan as well. Not only that, but everything between Jibanyan and Amy gets cleared up, so that's a nice touch. This could have been an anime-only thing, which I think they do cover eventually, but still pretty cool to have in the game. I will also mention that that's not the only backstory that gets covered in this game, though I'll save that for the post-game. Now as for the other key quests that we need to do, I'll again, like the others, skip over them as there's not much importance to them as there kinda was with this last one. The second one that you need to do revolves around upgrading your watch, and it's pretty much the same method as the last game, and the last key quest is similar to something that happens in the last game. That being that Nate's staff forgets his files again, but that isn't the whole thing as he was also looking into getting you a bike, which is the reward for completing it, so we finally unlocked the bike. Better late in the story than never, I guess, and you'll see why I say that. But now with the key quests out of the way, it's time to once again progress with the story, and to do that, we go back home. Doing that, Nate is upset that he'll potentially miss out on the typhoon. That's when we cut to another location where two yokais are being lovey-dovey with each other, even if they're in different factions. To quote Otacon, "Can love bloom in the battlefield?" That quote has nothing to do with this, but I just wanted to say it. But someone isn't taking a liking to their love, mainly out of jealousy, so they cause the typhoon to get worse. A random yokai that was merely a bystander shows up at Nate's house and asks us to put a stop to that yokai, warning us that if we don't stop them, then they could potentially blow away the whole town. So off we go to prevent that. We follow Broken Belly to the typhoon yokai, and once we get there, we witness the giant yokai blow away the yokai couple. I'm really saying yokai a lot here, huh? Just bear with me for a sec. We go in and fight the jealous yokai, iClone. Now for this boss fight, there isn't really much to say about it, as it's not all that unique. All you pretty much need to do is attack its main eye on their head, and the other eyes on his hands are pretty much optional. You'd only want to get rid of them so that they're unable to attack with their hands anymore, and with that they should be defeated easily. At least I didn't have much trouble beating them. After getting rid of Cyclops, Broken Bella thanks us and rewards us with his yokai medal. The yokai couple get back up and are able to be together once again in peace, and the chapter ends. Yup, that was the chapter. It's that short. Honestly, if it weren't for the key quest being somewhat important, I could have just skipped this chapter entirely. Hell, I probably could have skipped the whole story bits for this chapter and only talked about the key quest. Well, it's too late for that now, I guess. Oh, also, after this point is where the game's story kicks it into high gear, so I'm gonna put a spoiler warning here as well as some timestamps to skip to the post-game stuff or to the conclusion. You have been warned. And I guess while I'm at it, I might as well do some shilling and mention that I do have a Ko-Fi, or Ko-Fi, whichever way you want to pronounce it, where you can donate and support the channel directly. It works sort of like Patreon, but instead of doing a subscription sort of thing, it's you pay whatever. But if you don't feel like doing that or just don't have the money to do so, then just subscribing or leaving a like will also help. That not only lets me know that you're enjoying the video, but also lets me know that you want to see more from me. That's pretty much all I have to say, so enough YouTuber mode, and it's time to get back to the game. The chapter starts at the end of Nate's hangout with his friends, and as soon as they're gone, Hovernyon makes an appearance, in a bit of a hurry, asks us to come with them as there's a big battle happening. With no other explanation, he heads back to the past, and we make our way to Hovernyon's time to help him. Back in the past, we meet up with Hovernyon at the old train station, but before he goes into the details about the fight that's happening, he first questions us if we know about the fleshy souls and bony spirits. Yeah, they really just did a title drop there. Well, kinda. And it doesn't really work here since we're playing Psychic Specters, but whatever. Anyways, Hovernyon gives a bit of background between both groups, but what's important now is that something happened to cause both groups to become more hostile towards each other. With the potential of a big battle being inevitable, we go around gathering info. Once we do get that info where the big battle is taking place, we quickly rush over to hopefully prevent it. Over at the battlefield, we get a cutscene of both leaders meeting together before their battle, but instead of a negotiation happening, they exchange some words that worsen the tension between them. We luckily make it there before the battle starts, and we stumbled upon a yokai that we helped far back in one of the key quests, who asks us which side we're on. So remember in the beginning of the game where I said choosing the donuts would determine which side we'll be on? Well, I kinda lied. Well, more so I got it wrong. Because it's actually here where we make that decision. In the original games, it would again be decided upon which version you're playing, but with the third version, we get to pick. But again, as I've also mentioned, ultimately it doesn't matter since we'll still get to befriend both leaders as well as the version exclusive yokais. Though to befriend the leader of the opposite side you choose, you have to wait until the post-game. For this playthrough, I decided to pick Bony Spirits, which means I side with Arachnus and will also befriend him. With that decision made, Smogmella takes us to the Bony Spirit base so that we can meet with Arachnus. Meeting him, we try asking why they're fighting and if there's no way for them to talk things out. However, he's committed to settling their long-held feud. As we're thinking of trying to think of another solution to prevent the war, the sound of a horn is heard, declaring the start of the battle. Everyone goes off to battle, while we stay behind being told that the enemy is nearing the base's guardian mirror and that we need to stop them. With not much choice, we decide to help Arachnus, and after driving off the enemy, we then help out in the battle. How we do this is by claiming the blue glowing rocks that belong to the fleshy souls, which just involves us having to fight the yokais protecting them. Actually, now that I think about it, we're essentially just playing League of Legends. The glowing rocks are the towers that we have to get through, and then the guardian mirrors are the inhibitors. Don't mistake me, I too hate the animated League of Legends comparison. But we do destroy their guardian mirror, allowing us to enter the fleshy soul's base, and of course I pull a BM and completely take over all of their glowing rocks. Now with their base completely exposed, we walk up to Total Dude and start the boss fight. Well, sort of boss fight, as it's a normal fight and not like the other elaborate boss fights that we had before. With him defeated, we ask Total Dude why both the fleshy souls and bony spirits are fighting. With not much choice left, he explains that when deciding on a gift to give to Lord Enma, he and Arachnus fought over which type of donut to give. That's right, this whole ordeal and entire war was started all because of some donuts. Everyone's reaction to this is just appropriate. With everything seeming to be resolved, that's when Nathaniel arrives, stating that an issue remains. Confused as to what he means, he gathers all the bonies and fleshies and uncovers the culprits that ignited this war, with those being the wicked yokais. With their schemes exposed, Kin and Gin revealed to Nate and everyone that they're alive. But that's not all, as their leader, Dame Deadtime, also makes her appearance, to which the chapter ends. Yeah, this was another pretty short chapter of little substance. Well, at least when covering it, but actually, playing it does take a bit of time to complete, but nonetheless, it's still a pretty short chapter. Continuing from where the last chapter left off, Dame Deadtime then makes her exit as she just wanted to make an appearance. But of course, Total Dude and Arachnus aren't going to let her go easily, so they launch an attack. However, they're stopped by one of her elite wicked yokais. With her leaving safely, the elite yokai stays behind to put a stop to us, though both Total Dude and Arachnus stop her for us to escape. Realizing how weak we are against the wicked yokai, we make our leave. And now being safe, we plan our next course of action, to which Hovernyon suggests that we seek the help of Master Nyada, who, as he describes, is the yokai of yokai, the master of masters. Quite the reputation to live up to. Though as hard as it is to find him, luckily he's been seen around Old Springdale, so we split up and search for him. After getting some intel on what Master Nyada looks like, we regroup with Nathaniel and Hubbernyon, though once we find them, we catch them being distracted with watching Maximus Max. They apologize for their negligence, but we relate to them what we've learned. Believing that it'd be nearly impossible to find him with the description alone, that's when suddenly... After explaining everything to him, being the old cat he is, he takes a nap, and annoyed, Nathaniel runs off the train by himself. That's when Master Nyada wakes up and only tells Nate to go to Mount Middleton, as we'll find what we're looking for there. So back to Harrisville it is. Now this is going to be the beginning of a series of trials, aka key quests. So because of that, I'm gonna try to skim as much as I can with this. Only thing I'm gonna try to point out are the quest names. Why? Well, you'll see. First one, Nyada's Trials 4. Where are the first 3? I don't know, but it's just a tag minigame. Pretty simple. Nyada's Trial 5, we look for mother cat's kittens, so essentially a hide-and-seek minigame. But before we can progress with the next and final trial, you can see that there's a ranked door in our way. So yeah, if you didn't know by now that you could have upgraded your watch, well, now you do. I didn't. I was expecting a quest to come up needing me to, as that's been the case till then, but nope. The game just throws you a curveball, and says, yeah, you could have done it earlier. So time to do that first, but once you've got that, it's time to go through the final door and fight a bad yokai, as Nyada puts it. Reaching the top, we find the muncher resting, and wondering what to do, Master Nyada shows up and wakes him up by throwing a rock at him. Angered, reasonably so, the muncher lunges towards us and starts to fight. Not a boss fight, but a regular old fight. Once we do defeat him, he's ready to go another round, however that's when Nyada intervenes, telling us that we've passed the trials, which means we get to progress with the story. With the trials finally over, the muncher reveals that he's Nyada's student, and when Nathaniel shows up, it's also revealed that the trial, named the Moxie Trial, is based on Maximus Mask's motto. After that stunning revelation, Nyada then tells us, "May the hose be with you." That's right, a Star Wars reference. So if you didn't pick it up by now, Master Nyada is supposed to be, himself, a Star Wars parody. I mean, Master Nyada, Master Yoda, then the naming of his trials are essentially the original trilogy movies of Star Wars, episodes 4, 5, and 6, trials 4, 5, and 6. Yeah, even though I'm not a Star Wars fan anymore, because of Disney, I can still appreciate it. But back to the gang, Whisper at first thinks he's joking or means something different, but nope, he gives us a hose and doesn't elaborate. Does that make him a Chad? I guess. With that, we go back to where Toto Dude and Arachnus are to help them deal with the wicked yokai. We find him in a state of exhaustion, and the wicked yokai, on the ferry, is ready to get rid of us. Not exactly sure what to do, that's when we hear Nyada's voice telling us to use the hose. Yep, Star Wars reference. Whisper and Jibanyan do some shenanigans with the hose, and end up actually hitting on the ferry with it. And with him angered, we jump in to begin the fight. This is another one of those cases where the fight is presented as a boss fight, but it's kinda not, so it shouldn't be too hard to defeat them. With them now defeated, they leave, and that's when Toto Dude and Arachnus thank us, as well as deciding to put their differences away to team up against the wicked yokai. The game then cuts to on the ferry back at Dame Detime's lair, where they get sent to the Shadow Realm for having been defeated, while the rest get ready to launch their plan into action, and thus ending the chapter. The start of the chapter continues from where it left off with the gang, when suddenly Master Nyada appears and alerts everyone of Dead Time's actions. He also warns us about the other elite wicked yokais and how we must defeat them before stopping Dame Dead Time. So the group decides to split up to stop the elite yokais, but when we leave the area, we run into Dead Time. She begins gloating to us how we're too late to stop her. Furthermore, she sends us to the future to give us a glimpse of her horrible future. And after exploring it and returning to the past, we find Nathaniel and Hubbernyon who tell us about the smog coming from certain locations. We split up to check them out, and of course we find the elite wicked yokais to each one of them. Needing to stop them, we fight each of them and destroy the machine producing the smog. And after destroying all of the machines and thinking that the smog will go away, we're surprised to find that it doesn't. That's when Habrignon shows up to tell us that Nathaniel has found Dame Deadtime's lair, so off we go to actually put a stop to her. Once inside, we're stopped by Keen and Gin, but instead of fighting them, Nathaniel and Habrignon both stop them for us to continue forward. Doing so, we head further in and once again face Dame Deadtime for the final time. We declare to her that we'll put an end to her evil plan, and so the fight begins. There isn't much of a gimmick that you need to overcome for this fight, it's all pretty straightforward. Though she will sometimes summon a wicked yokai, so you will need to get rid of them. But with the lack of a gimmick that you need to overcome, you'll eventually realize that this is a scripted fight, as when she's near half HP, she'll use a move to fully recover her health, to which the fight will end. Being able to rewind time to fully heal herself, we're left in a state of shock, of not knowing what to do. Even worse is that we find Nathaniel and Habrignon getting exhausted from fighting Kin and Gin, as they too are able to rewind time to heal themselves. This is where we're out of the cutscene and able to move around. The game's marker will point us towards Dame Deadtime to fight her again, but if you do that, then you'll just be in an endless loop of defeating her, but not actually defeating her. But what you're actually supposed to do is fight Kin and Gin instead, as if you're able to remember from the fight with them a couple chapters ago, destroying their time stone will prevent them from being able to rewind time, so that's what we're meant to do here. Select yes to save them both, and we jump in just in time as they were about to be attacked. We don't jump straight into a fight against them, but rather continue the cutscene with Nathaniel and Habrignon. Nathaniel apologizes to Habrignon for not being able to protect them as well as not being brave. However, Habrignon reassures them and calls him a true hero, as he then shows them the bottle caps of the yokais that wanted to be friends with him. Seeing them, Nathaniel knows what to do next, which then leads to a voice scene where he's essentially pulling a Goku, asking for energy for a spirit bomb moment. With the yokais agreeing to be his friend, Nate's Model Zero Watch then gets transferred over to Nathaniel, and along with that, the bottle caps become yokai medals.
Yokai Watch, Model Zero! Come on out, my friends! Let's go! Yokai medals! Do your thing!
Oh! Summoning time! Summoning time! Let's go!
How dare you, brats!
Playtime is over, children. Shall we finish up, Keen?
You guys are finished! Let's go!
Gotcha!
That's right, instead of playing as Nate with our team, we instead play as Nathaniel with this party. It's a pretty cool story moment if you ask me, but as for the fight itself, it's just a repeat of the previous Kin and Gin fight, so there aren't many differences here aside from the team you have. With their defeat, we can finally head back to defeat Dame Deadtime once and for all. The fight is again the same as the previous one, but this time we actually go through the whole fight, leading to her defeat.
Charming!
With her beaten, we naturally celebrate as we've overcome the big bad, ending the game. Yeah, obviously she's not defeated. Come on, this is a JRPG. She's obviously gonna have another form.
Ugh, how dare you! I'll show you!
Heading out to confront her one final time, for real this time, we get greeted to her final and true form. Oh, also be sure you're actually prepared for this fight because it can be challenging, you'll see. But once you are ready, then it's time to get into the final fight to end her evil plan and save Springdale once again. Now this final fight is one you're gonna have to micromanage quite a bit, as Dame Demona will consistently inspirit your yokais, so there's that. But that's not the only thing, as you're gonna want to target her tail things. That's because they debuff your attacks, which might not be much, but even still, you'll want to get rid of them. The other attack that you really want to be careful of is her Soul Steal. From the name, you might think it'll steal your soul meter, but that's not the case, though she does have a move that does that. No, when she uses this move, it summons a couple of blue souls, I guess, that can possibly kill one of your yokais if not taken care of. How do you deal with them or defend yourself from them? Well, by using our target cursor, of course. We just need to tap them and they go away. Just be sure to turn off the speed up when doing this. That's because you only have a few seconds to do so and they move around a lot, which could lead you to missing them. And that's pretty much all you have to look out for in the fight. I mean, there is her Soultimate move, however that's something you can't really avoid as she will steal some of your soul meter. As for the fight itself, it can be pretty challenging, which is why I said to prepare beforehand. I found myself sort of struggling to beat her, enough so that it led me to wondering if I was underleveled. I mean, I was kind of storming through the final parts of the game's story, but everything before this felt like a breeze, so the sudden jump of difficulty took me aback somewhat. Well, it's either that or I was just being reckless as I was just trying to beat the game at that point. But thankfully I had enough revives for the fight, which, let me tell ya, I didn't have much of, and I was able to defeat Dame Demona.
We did it! The light is back in Springdale! All thanks to my hard work. You're welcome.
You have got to be kidding me.
I beg your pardon.
You don't even know how to fight.
Cut it out.
Nathaniel?
Hovernyon? Huh?
We're always with you.
Yeah! We're all friends! Maximus Mask is the best! With love, moxie, courage, and friends! We will see evil's bitter end.
With her now gone and Old Springdale being saved, it's time for us to go back to our time. Nathaniel and everyone says their farewells to us, with Nathaniel also thanking us for showing him the greatness that is friendship. Too bad I still don't have any friends. We do one last Maximus Max pose and get in Miradox to go back home, ending Yokai Watch 2 Psychic Specters. This is normally where I would talk about my overall thoughts on the game, however, there's one more thing that I need to talk about, and that's the post-game. If you guys remember anything from the last Yokai Watch video, then you know that I didn't talk very much about the post-game content. That's because I didn't think much about it at the time, and the only thing that was noteworthy was the Infinite Inferno. which again I should have at least talked about a bit more. But for this sequel, I would say the post-game content is the thing that most people fondly remember, as there was a good amount of stuff to do. Before I get into it though, I want to mention that the reason why you're seeing this video late is because I did try to do most of the post-game stuff. However, there was quite a lot of grinding and doing a lot of tedious things that I had to do to get to some of those contents. And because I got busy with life, I didn't get as far with it as I wanted to, so I apologize for that. But I will try to cover some of the stuff I did and the stuff that you are able to do and get. The Infinite Inferno makes a return that Harrisville tells you about when you reload your save after beating the game. But there is a condition that you need to fulfill to enter the Gates of Hell. You'll first need to go to Breezy Hills and find a mansion that's located on the top right of the map. Go inside and talk to the man, who gives us details about himself, which points to him having been Nathaniel's friend in the past who got bullied, which led him to becoming the lone wolf that he was when we first met him. But man, this guy sure did get the luck of the draw, seeing that he became successful while Nathaniel is... well... But after talking to the old man, we get stopped by the lady who gives us a key to a shack that's located to the west of Blossom Heights. Unlocking the door will reveal a ladder going down, and descending so will take us to the Infinite Inferno. To remind you what the Infinite Inferno is, this area is a long descent downwards, where you fight bosses you fought previously, but higher leveled. Not only is this a place where you're fighting your way to the bottom, but it's also an area for you to befriend rare and higher ranked yokais. I would say it's a place to grind as well, at least when you get near the bottom. However, there's a better grinding method than this place, which I'll mention in a bit. But having gone through the game, you'll of course realize that some of the old boss yokais from the last game never made an appearance. Well, except for two that can be befriended through some quests. Well, you're able to find them here in their Infinite Inferno versions, so there's that at least. As for what's on the final floor, you'd naturally think that there'd be something different, but nope, it's again Wobble Walk, and that applies to the bosses you'll encounter on your way to the bottom. So while it is cool to see that this place makes a comeback, it's also upsetting to see that nothing has changed about it. At least that's what I would say, if it wasn't for what you get after defeating Wobble Walk. Depending on how lucky you are, there is a chance for him to drop an item, which is used for a quest that if completed, will let you befriend Wobble Walk. And that's not all, as another reward you get for defeating him is that you're given access to a new area called Divine Paradise. It's still similar to the Infinite Inferno where you go through a gauntlet of bosses, but instead of going downwards in hell, you're instead going upwards in heaven to fight God. Or I guess something akin to it. So the game kinda gets you in the first half, making you think that nothing was added, only to get introduced to a new set of challenges. Moving on from that, another thing to do are getting the rare yokais that require the items from the passwords and QR codes. As I've mentioned way back, you can get certain key items from the post office, and upon getting them, will spawn the rare yokais. There are the robo yokais that you'll have to search for by searching each train station. This is the most tedious one. The fruit-based Jubanyons that are located in the Harrisville school. Now for the others, they require a lot of grinding, so be ready to do that because this next post-game location is a doozy. So as I mentioned in the beginning when you start the game, there's an option to link your copy of Psychic Specters with your Bony Spirits or Fleshy Souls save file. And if you do have either or both save files, then it tells you to talk to a man outside of the shack to enter a secret dungeon. Well, that shack is located at San Fantastico, which is a place you've at least visited once during the game's story, and talking to him, he'll give you a key for linking either games, which gives you access to the shack. This isn't the play for something conspicuous, I swear. Inside, there'll be a mirror po and a save point, however the mirror po isn't a fast travel spot. Then behind the glowing door will lead you to Mystery Way, the place where you'll probably be visiting over and over again for the chance to get some exclusive rare yokais. Now as far as I know, doing the Mystery Way can only be done once a day, at least for the reward side of it. You can continue to explore it over and over again, but you won't get anything out of it by doing so. But there's more to Mystery Way, believe it or not, as for linking whichever versions of Yokai Watch, the man outside will give you a key for their respective game as well. And that's not all, because if you're such a big fan that you bought both versions like I did, then not only will you just get both keys for both versions, but you'll also get a third key for having linked both games. And I will mention that you can access them at any point, however you'll want to be around level 80 as strong yokais lie within them, especially for the Gold Gleaming Way, which is the third key you get. But the rewards for getting to the end and for fighting the boss is a spin on the Crankakai for something good. What you'll be wanting to get are the rare yokais, which can be one of 5 Geminions, or some other rare yokai. Then for the item you'll also want to be getting is the Moxie Mark, which is used for getting the yokai Maximus N. You find this yokai by visiting Nathaniel's grave in Harrisville, near your grandma's place. It's pretty strange because you're befriending the ghost of your grandpa and making him fight yokais. Again, strange. Now all of that aside from Maximus N would have been in the original version of Yokai Watch 2. But this is Psychic Specters, so you know they added some new content for this third version. So you know how midway through the game we got a quest to see Jibanya's backstory? Well, one of the newly added stuff is the occlusion of Whisper's backstory. This is an entire 3-part questline with full-on cutscenes that, again, shows Whisper's past and reveals what sort of yokai he is. It even has a whole opening for it. To access the quest, you'll first have to have beaten the game, then you start a new day by resting to watch a cutscene will play. We follow Bronzelo. Wait, what do you mean Bronzelo who? He was there in the opening cutscene. How could you forget him? Well, if you did forget him, he makes his awesome reappearance for this quest only. He brings back Kin and Gin, and once they're told about Dame Deadtime's defeat, they concoct a plan to get rid of Whisper by sending him to the past. Once the cutscene ends, you can talk to Whisper to start the 3-part questline. Now, as somewhat big as Level 5 marketed this new questline for Psychic Specters, the quest itself isn't that elaborate. It's similar to the Jibanian questline where you go from point A to point B and watch a couple of cutscenes. I'm not saying I dislike it or anything, but I will say to not expect too much from it. Also, I'm not going to be going over the questline as I feel like that's something that you guys should experience for yourselves. Lastly, the final big post-game content that you can do that was added for this version is Geta Land. To get to Geta Land, you'll first have to upgrade your watch to S rank, to which a yokai will be waiting outside your house, talk to them, and then the quest will begin. Now hearing this, you'll at first think that because it's brought up after beating the game, that it should be fine to head there immediately. But that's not the case. Well, depending on your level, because heading through the train, you'll be met with an insane level spike, as the boss you'll have to fight on the train is level 80. So if you don't have a good team or aren't even near that level, have fun grinding. Oh, speaking of grinding, let me go on a bit of a tangent here. But the best spot to grind is to go in front of the train station in Old Springdale. At the spot where we fought Dame Deadtime's true form, there will be a baffle board where the answer will be Miradox. Summon him, and he'll be able to take you back to refight Dame Deadtime. Doing this while also equipping the XP multiplier Soul Gem will help you get ready to tackle the endgame stuff. But at Geta Land, there will be several questlines for you to tackle, which some will let you befriend rare yokais, especially the Elite Wicked yokais, which you weren't able to do in the original versions. So with all of that, there's a ton to do in this post-game, enough so that you could probably sink well over 60 plus hours. There's probably even more stuff that I'm forgetting to mention, but that's where I'm going to stop with this section as I think it's time to wrap this up. When it comes to this game and why some people look on it fondly, I feel like I can safely assume that it's not because of the story. It's not entirely bad per se, as it definitely does have one more so than the first game, where that was mainly a slice of life with a big conflict just happening in the end, while this one did have an overall narrative that it was building up towards. Though where it does fall short is in the main story stuff that you do, as some of it does feel like filler with some of the quest and story segments, like with the opening 3 chapters. While I was complaining about some parts of it, all of that stuff is understandable because, of course, they need to reintroduce the old mechanics while introducing new ones. But there are parts of it where, as a returning player, it is monotonous to go through, especially when you consider that the release between games wasn't that long, with there being a 1-year gap. While it may seem like a long gap, I personally don't think it's that long of a time for someone to forget the mechanics for a game like this. Sort of like Pokemon, yes, here we go again. The mechanics are made easily understandable that it shouldn't be hard for someone who's played a Pokemon game to completely forget how it works. And the same is true with Yokai Watch. And again, I know they can't remove it or make an option to not go through the tutorial because it's intertwined with the story. This is just me nitpicking as a returning player, and at least they tried to pair the tutorial segments with fun story bits. Though if I really have to complain, or at least nitpick more for the parts I felt like were filler, I don't think we needed that chase sequence for Eddie's watch. There's also the chapter with the typhoon that I feel like could have been omitted. I know that's the same chapter with Jibanya's backstory, but they could have done what they did with Whisper's backstory quest and made it part of the post-game. That quest I feel like was the only important thing in that chapter, aside from bringing up the bonies and fleshies again. Other than that, it just felt like filler to pad the game out, as it's placed in such a weird spot between story events. Or they could have just moved it to an early part of the game, like made it the 4th chapter or something. But again, this is probably just me nitpicking. As for the story itself, yeah, it's serviceable. It's nothing groundbreaking, and I don't expect it to be so, like a Metal Gear or Monster. It's just there for the sake of having an entertaining story, and it accomplishes that, so it's fine. Though I will say that it does feel sort of rushed near the end, as the chapters come and go quickly. Though that's probably the same with the others, but it felt more so in the end. But as I've mentioned earlier, the story really isn't what people fondly remember. It's the amount of content the game has. I mentioned this in the post-game segment, but there's a lot of stuff that you're able to do and complete. When Bony Spirits and Fleshy Souls came out, yeah, there was a decent amount of stuff to do, but it's now laughable in comparison when Psychic Specters released, as it increased the amount of stuff to do. Which, for a game like this, is kinda what you want. You'll definitely get your money's worth from the post-game and side content, which I would hope you do since you've probably bought one of the 2 original versions of the game, or both, then bought the 3rd version to experience new stuff, with that 3rd version kinda needing you to have bought both versions to experience everything and get everything. Well, that is if you bought the digital versions for them, otherwise you wouldn't have gotten all the yokais. You know, thinking about it, level 5 are trying to bleed our wallets dry, huh? Anyways, when it comes to what reviewers said about Yokai Watch 2 and the scores they gave, I think they were a bit harsh. Reading some of the criticisms that they said, mainly from IGN, I do kind of agree with them, at least with the dual quests that the game forces you to do, and while I don't think the games are anything above an 8, I don't think it's around a 5 either. Look, I know review scores have been viewed differently nowadays, with people believing that a 7 out of 10 means it's a bad game, but it isn't. And that's where I would safely put these games, as, while it didn't do anything revolutionary, which again I don't expect it to, but I can say that the quality and personality really shines. And not only that, but once again, the amount of content is quite vast with Psychic Specters, and not many games can say that. So yes, while it's not the most impressive game, especially within the 3DS library, I can still say that it was a fun time to play. It's really a shame that the game did not do well in the West, as, again, it is a fun game to play. I know way back I said that it was because of the Pokemon boom that happened the same year that this game was released in the West, but even if Pokemon didn't come out, the game still wouldn't have done well. I mean, the low sales for the last game didn't show any promise for the future of the series. Then there was also the fact that the 3DS was about to be on life support because of the announcement of the Nintendo Switch. So because of its Western release having been pushed that far back, it was just doomed to fail from the beginning, which is just unfortunate. I feel like if Level 5 planned this ahead and released these games around the same year they released in Japan, then it probably would have done slightly better. I only say slightly because monster collecting games that aren't Pokemon don't do well outside of Japan. So if you are one of those people, please play other monster collecting games. I promise you'll enjoy them. Probably even more so than Pokemon. So even with the series dead, as I said in the last video with Yokai Watch 1, I would still say that it's worth checking out Yokai Watch 2, especially Psychic Specters since that's the definitive version. But with that spiel out of the way, I think it's time for me to put Yokai Watch back on the shelf again until next year rolls around, to try out the 3rd game in the entry, the one I never finished. I'll share more in that video, so anyways, bye! I love abrupt endings. But thank you guys for watching, and if I have to be honest, this video was supposed to come out way earlier, but as you can see, that didn't happen. I wanted it to come out at the same time as I released the first Yokai Watch video for consistency's sake, but yeah, I got busy with other stuff, and there was me trying to capture most of the post-game stuff, it just didn't pan out well. The same will probably happen with the 3rd Yokai Watch video, but here's promising that it doesn't, but it probably will. That's enough out of me though, but again, like and subscribe to help the channel out and to let me know that you want to see more. And with that, have yourselves a damn good one. See ya.